The stench hit her first, rot and rainwater and something worse. Evelyn Calloway squinted through the Tennessee downpour, certain she'd heard a sound from the dumpster behind the clinic. A whimper, weak but unmistakable. She hesitated, then lifted the heavy lid. Two amber eyes stared back from a face so gaunt it barely resembled a dog. The German shepherd lay motionless atop bags of medical waste, his coat matted with filth and blood, right hind leg twisted at an impossible angle. Rain pelted his emaciated body, each drop making him flinch. What stopped Evelyn's heart wasn't his condition, though God knows it was horrific, but what he did when their eyes met. No growl, no fear. Instead, with effort that clearly caused agony, he lifted his head slightly, and his tail thumped once against the garbage, still hoping, still believing humans might be good. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Evelyn Evie Calloway had seen her share of suffering. 12 years as a military nurse had shown her humanity at its worst. Broken bodies in Afghanistan, shattered minds returning home. But at 42, she'd hoped Cedar Grove, Tennessee, population 6,273, would offer respite from trauma. The small veterinary clinic where she'd worked these past 18 months was supposed to be her sanctuary. Until today. "Easy now," she whispered, reaching cautiously into the dumpster. The German shepherd didn't flinch away. Too weak, she realized. His coat, what should have been luxurious black and tan, was a filthy mess of matted fur and open sores. Ribs protruded like accusatory fingers, pointing to human cruelty. Rain plastered Evie's gray-streaked brown hair to her face as she gently slid her arms beneath the dog's skeletal frame. He weighed almost nothing, a shadow of what he should have been. "I've got you," she murmured. "You're safe now, Doctor." Robert Anderson met her at the clinic's back door, his weathered face creasing with concern beneath salt and pepper hair. At 59, he'd been treating Cedar Grove's animals for over 30 years. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed, helping Evie carry the dog to an examination table. Someone did this deliberately. The dog lay motionless under the harsh fluorescent lights, eyes half closed but tracking their movements. Male, they determined, approximately 3 years old. No collar, no microchip. But the scars told his story. Cigarette burns dotting his belly, old bite wounds around his neck and face, the broken leg that had healed wrong. "Fighting dog?" Evie asked, gently cleaning mud from a particularly deep wound. Dr. Anderson's face hardened. "Bait dog, used to train the fighters." He pointed to distinctive scarring. "These are practice sessions. They don't want their prize dogs damaged in training." The dog's eyes met Evie's, intelligent, assessing, and impossibly not hateful. Something in that amber gaze spoke to the brokenness in her own soul, the part still healing 3 years after escaping her marriage to Michael. "He needs a name," she said suddenly. Dr. Anderson raised an eyebrow. "That's getting attached. He might not make it through the night." Evie's jaw set stubbornly. "He will." She studied the dog, noting how, despite everything, his eyes held a fierce light. "Phoenix," she decided, "because he's going to rise from these ashes." Outside, the storm intensified, raindrops like bullets against the windows. Cedar Grove slept, unaware of the creature fighting for life in its midst, or the woman who'd just made him a promise she intended to keep. Neither knew that saving Phoenix would unearth secrets in this seemingly peaceful town, secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. Phoenix's tail thumped weakly against the metal table, once deliberate. A contract between them. The first 48 hours were critical. Evie barely left Phoenix's side, sleeping on a cot beside his kennel at the clinic. Dr. Anderson had warned her not to expect miracles. The dog's condition was precarious at best. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, infected wounds, and internal parasites would challenge even a strong animal's will to live. Phoenix was anything but strong in body, though something in his eyes suggested his spirit might be another matter entirely. "You're stubborn, aren't you?" Evie murmured, gently inserting the IV line during the first night. Phoenix watched her steadily, his breathing shallow but determined. "Good. You'll need that." Cedar Grove Veterinary Clinic wasn't equipped for the intensive care Phoenix required, but Dr. Anderson seemed committed to treating him regardless, waiving fees that would have run into thousands. "Consider it my contribution," he'd said, avoiding Evie's eyes. "Some cases just get to you." By the third day, Phoenix had beaten the odds enough to accept small amounts of soft food from Evie's hand. His tail, once merely a limp appendage, now managed a weak wag when she entered the room. The change was subtle but profound, as though Phoenix had made a decision to live despite everything. "I'm not qualified for this level of trauma," Dr. Anderson admitted, watching Evie coax Phoenix into taking antibiotics hidden in a spoonful of peanut butter. "What you learned in the military, it's making the difference here." Evie didn't respond. Her medical training as a combat nurse helped, certainly, but something deeper drove her dedication to this particular animal. Something about the way Phoenix watched her, without judgment, without the wariness she'd come to expect in her own gaze when she looked in the mirror. During the second week, Phoenix's physical condition began to improve. The raw wounds started healing, his coat regained some luster with careful bathing, and the dullness in his eyes gave way to a keener awareness. But the psychological wounds ran deeper. Any sudden movement sent him cowering to the corner of his kennel. Male voices, particularly deep or loud ones, triggered visible tremors throughout his body, and sometimes, while sleeping, his legs would twitch violently, soft whimpers escaping as he fought invisible enemies. "He's dreaming," Dr. Anderson explained when Evie mentioned it. "Or, more accurately, having nightmares. We'll never know exactly what happened to him, but his brain remembers everything." "Will that ever go away?" Evie asked. Dr. Anderson's expression turned unreadable. "Some scars don't show on the outside, but they're the deepest kind. Given what he's been through, he might always carry those memories." The words hit uncomfortably close to home. Evie absently touched the thin scar near her collarbone, a souvenir from the last time Michael had taught her a lesson. Some memories never fully faded, even when the visible wounds healed. By the third week, Dr. Anderson deemed Phoenix stable enough to leave the clinic. "He needs a quiet environment to continue recovering, somewhere consistent with minimal triggers." "I'll take him," Evie said without hesitation. Dr. Anderson frowned. "Evie, he's not just a pet with a sad past. This dog has severe trauma. He may never be fully rehabilitated." "I'm aware. Your apartment barely allows pets at all. Taking on a case like this—" "I'll move if I have to," she interrupted. "He trusts me. That's worth something." Dr. Anderson studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll help with medications and follow-up care. But Evie, be prepared. Recovery isn't linear. There will be setbacks." That evening, Evie's elderly neighbor, Grace Sullivan, watched with curiosity as Evie carefully helped Phoenix into her ground-floor apartment. At 68, Grace had lived in Cedar Grove her entire life and considered herself a guardian of old-fashioned values in a rapidly changing world. "That creature safe to be around?" she called from her porch, eyeing Phoenix's scarred appearance. Evie paused. "He's the one who hasn't been safe around humans, Ms. Sullivan. But we're working on trusting each other." Grace's weathered face softened unexpectedly. "My daddy always said you can judge a person's whole character by how they treat an animal that can't offer 'em anything in return." She nodded approvingly. "You need any help with him, you just holler." Phoenix's first night in the apartment was challenging for both of them. Evie had prepared a soft bed in the corner of her living room, but Phoenix refused to use it, instead crawling under her dining table where he could survey the entire room. He wouldn't eat until she left the food and backed away. Twice, he startled violently at ordinary sounds, a car backfiring outside, the neighbor's door closing. At midnight, Evie woke to heart-wrenching whimpers. She found Phoenix trembling uncontrollably, trapped in a nightmare. Without thinking, she sat on the floor beside him, not touching, just present. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you again. I promise." Phoenix's eyes opened, wild with panic before gradually focusing on her face. Evie expected him to retreat further under the table. Instead, inch by agonizing inch, Phoenix dragged himself toward her until his head rested tentatively against her knee. The gesture, so small yet requiring such monumental trust, brought tears to her eyes. "We're going to be okay," she told him, gently stroking his head. "Both of us." In the weeks that followed, Evie established a careful routine. Mornings began with medication and gentle physical therapy for Phoenix's damaged leg. Dr. Anderson had confirmed it would never fully heal. The break had been left untreated too long, but proper exercise could improve his mobility. Afternoons included short walks, gradually increasing in length as Phoenix's strength returned. His limp remained pronounced, but his endurance improved daily. The emotional progress came in smaller increments. Phoenix still startled at loud noises. He still pressed himself against walls when unknown men approached. But he began to explore the apartment with cautious curiosity, and his tail now wagged readily when Evie returned home from errands. The most significant breakthrough came 6 weeks after finding him. Evie was washing dishes when she dropped a glass which shattered loudly on the floor. Instead of hiding, Phoenix limped quickly to her side, body tense but present, as though checking if she needed protection. "I'm okay, boy," she assured him, kneeling to his level. "Just clumsy." Phoenix studied her face, then did something extraordinary. He licked her cheek once before backing away to let her clean up the mess. The simple act of affection felt momentous. That weekend, Evie decided Phoenix was ready for a longer outdoor excursion. The small park near her apartment complex opened early, offering relative quiet before families arrived with children and noise. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the dew-covered grass, Evie watched Phoenix cautiously exploring, his nose twitching at new scents, his gait awkward but determined. For a brief moment she glimpsed what he might have been without human cruelty, a magnificent animal, intelligent and dignified. Something painful squeezed in her chest at the thought of all that had been stolen from him. "You two are out early." The voice, male, unfamiliar, came from behind them. Phoenix froze instantly, every muscle tensed. Evie turned to find a man watching them from a nearby bench. Tall, with close-cropped brown hair and weathered skin, he appeared to be in his mid-40s. Something about his steady gaze made her instinctively step closer to Phoenix. "Beautiful shepherd," the man commented, eyes never leaving the dog. "Retired military?" "Rescue," Evie replied curtly, noting how Phoenix was trembling slightly, though he hadn't retreated. "Interesting." The man stood, and Evie noticed how Phoenix pressed against her leg. "That leg injury looks significant. Been through something rough, hasn't he?" "We're just leaving," Evie said, turning away. "That dog looks familiar," the man called after her. "If you're interested in his background, I might have information." Evie hesitated, then kept walking. Phoenix limping rapidly beside her. Something about the encounter left her deeply unsettled. Phoenix's reaction had been fear, certainly, but mixed with something else. Recognition, perhaps. Back at the apartment, Grace Sullivan was watering plants on her porch. She frowned when she saw Evie's expression. "Something happened to you and that poor creature?" "Just a strange man at the park," Evie said, unlocking her door while Phoenix pressed anxiously against her. Grace's eyes narrowed. "This town ain't as simple as it looks, Evelyn. Some folks have long memories and longer grudges. You be careful with questions about where that dog came from." "What do you mean?" The older woman glanced around before lowering her voice. "There's money in this county that don't come from nowhere. Folks with nice houses who don't seem to work much." She nodded toward Phoenix. "Animals like him, they're part of something ugly. Something nobody talks about." Before Evie could press further, Grace retreated inside, leaving her with more questions than answers. That afternoon, she called Dr. Anderson. "I think someone recognized Phoenix at the park today," she explained. "A man I've never seen before." The long pause on the other end of the line heightened her unease. "Robert, are you there?" "Be careful, Evie," Dr. Anderson finally responded, his voice tight. "Cedar Grove looks peaceful, but there are operations in the surrounding county, dogfighting rings, breeding facilities for fighting dogs. If Phoenix came from one of those—" He trailed off. "What aren't you telling me?" Evie pressed. "Just keep a low profile with him for now," Dr. Anderson advised. "And maybe don't walk in that park for a while." That night, as Phoenix slept fitfully near her bed, Evie found herself staring at the ceiling, mind racing. She'd come to Cedar Grove seeking peace after the chaos of military service and a failed marriage. Instead, she'd stumbled into something dark, something connected to the broken animal who now depended on her. "We'll figure this out," she whispered to Phoenix in the darkness. His ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and his tail thumped once against the floor. The same response he'd given that first day in the dumpster. A response that said, despite everything, he still believed in the possibility of good. For the next week, Evie varied their walking route, avoiding the park entirely. Phoenix continued to improve physically. His coat now gleamed with health, and though his limp remained pronounced, his muscles had begun to fill out the once skeletal frame. But the mysterious encounter had left its mark. Phoenix seemed more vigilant outdoors, his head constantly turning, scanning their surroundings with an intensity that spoke of renewed anxiety. "You recognized that man, didn't you?" Evie asked one evening as they sat on her small patio. Phoenix's ears twitched at her words, his amber eyes meeting hers with that uncanny intelligence. Sometimes she could swear he understood every word. Grace Sullivan had taken to leaving small treats for Phoenix, homemade dog biscuits and the occasional marrow bone. "My Harold would have liked your Phoenix," she told Evie one afternoon. "He always said a dog with scars had earned the right to judge us all." Grace's late husband had been a respected figure in Cedar Grove, a former sheriff who'd served the county for 3 decades. His photograph still hung in the town hall, a stern-faced man with kind eyes that reminded Evie of her own father. "Harold used to say Cedar Grove had secrets deep as a Tennessee limestone cave," Grace continued, watching Phoenix cautiously accept a biscuit from her gnarled hand. "Last few years before he passed, he was mighty troubled about something. Wouldn't tell me what. Said the less I knew, the safer I'd be." The comment lingered with Evie, joining the growing constellation of unease that had begun with the man at the park. On Thursday morning, Dr. Anderson called. "Phoenix is due for a follow-up. Can you bring him in today?" The clinic was unusually quiet when they arrived. The receptionist, Marge, was absent, and the waiting room stood empty. Dr. Anderson ushered them quickly into an examination room at the back. "I need to talk to you," he said without preamble, his voice low. "About the man you saw." Phoenix pressed against Evie's leg, sensing the tension. "You know who he is?" Evie asked. Dr. Anderson ran a hand through his silver hair, his expression troubled. His name is Thomas Blackwood. He's been asking around town about a German shepherd with a damaged leg. He hesitated. He claims the dog was stolen from a legitimate breeding facility. Evie's blood ran cold. That's absurd. Phoenix was used as a bait dog. The scars. I know. Dr. Anderson cut her off, glancing toward the door. I don't believe his story for a second. But Blackwood has connections to Ellis Harker. The name meant nothing to Evie, but Dr. Anderson's tone conveyed everything she needed to know. Harker owns half the county, he explained. Officially, he's in real estate and livestock. Unofficially, he shook his head. There have been rumors for years about dogfighting operations on his property out past the county line. Nothing's ever been proven. And this Blackwood works for him? His security consultant, whatever that means. People who cross Harker tend to regret it. Dr. Anderson's gaze dropped to Phoenix, who had retreated to the corner of the examination room. I think Phoenix might have come from Harker's operation. If so, they want him back, not because he's valuable, but because he's evidence. The implications settled like ice in Evie's stomach. What should I do? Be careful. Document everything about Phoenix, his injuries, his recovery, and maybe consider— Dr. Anderson hesitated. It might be safer if you left town for a while. Both of you. The suggestion stung more than Evie expected. Cedar Grove had become home, the first place since her divorce where she'd felt settled. The thought of running again— I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Phoenix deserves justice, not another escape. Dr. Anderson looked like he wanted to argue, but instead sighed heavily. Then at least be prepared. These people aren't known for subtlety. That night, Evie double-checked her locks before bed, an old habit from her marriage that she'd gradually abandoned in Cedar Grove. Phoenix seemed to sense her unease, positioning himself near the front door instead of his usual spot beside her bed. It's going to be okay, she told him, not entirely convinced herself. Around 2 in the morning, Phoenix's low growl pulled Evie from an uneasy sleep. She froze, listening intently. The apartment was dark and silent, but Phoenix stood rigid at the bedroom doorway, hackles raised, staring toward the living room. Then she heard it, the faint scrape of metal against the front door lock. Heart pounding, Evie reached for her phone. Phoenix's growl deepened, not the fearful sound she'd heard in his nightmares, but something primal and protective. Despite his fear, despite his trauma, he was standing between her and whatever threat approached. The sound at the door stopped. Footsteps retreated. Evie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good boy," she whispered. Phoenix remained alert for another hour before finally settling, though he stayed positioned at the bedroom threshold. By morning, Evie wondered if she'd overreacted, if ordinary nighttime noises had triggered their mutual paranoia, but the small scratches around her front door lock suggested otherwise. She called the police, but their response was frustratingly casual. No actual break-in occurred, the officer explained, barely glancing at the marks. Could have been kids messing around, or just someone who got the wrong apartment. Before leaving, the officer eyed Phoenix with obvious suspicion. "That dog safe? Looks like a fighter." "He's a victim," Evie corrected sharply. "And he's the one who alerted me to the attempted break-in." The officer shrugged. "Well, keep him leashed in public. Dog with that history gets into trouble, won't matter who started it." After he left, Grace appeared at Evie's door with a concerned frown. "Saw the police? Everything all right?" When Evie explained, the older woman's expression hardened. "That'd be Harker's doing. Harold used to say half the department was in his pocket." She lowered her voice. "My Harold kept files. Things he couldn't prove officially but knew were happening. After that dog came to you, I started thinking maybe it wasn't just coincidence." Grace disappeared into her apartment, returning with a weathered manila folder. "Harold was investigating Harker before his heart gave out. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep these safe." She pressed the folder into Evie's hands. "Maybe there's something in here that'll help your Phoenix." That afternoon, Evie called in sick to the clinic and spread Harold Sullivan's files across her kitchen table. Phoenix watched from his spot nearby, unusually restless. The documents painted a disturbing picture. Harold had mapped properties connected to Ellis Harker through shell companies and relatives, including a remote farm near the Kentucky border. Newspaper clippings documented suspicious fires, missing pets, and sudden departures of people who'd spoken against Harker's business interests. Most disturbing were Harold's handwritten notes about large cash transactions coinciding with weekend gatherings at the border property. "He was building a case," Evie murmured. "But against what, exactly?" A photograph slipped from between the pages, an aerial view of the border property, showing outbuildings and what appeared to be kennels. Scrawled on the back in Harold's handwriting, "Fighting Operation. Need inside evidence." Phoenix had crept closer, his nose twitching at the documents. When Evie showed him the photograph, his reaction was immediate and violent. He backed away, trembling, ears flat against his head. "You know this place," she whispered. "Don't you?" Before she could process the implication, someone knocked at her door. Phoenix instantly tensed, a low growl building in his throat. Evie approached cautiously, papers hidden away. Through the peephole, she saw Thomas Blackwood. For a moment she considered ignoring him, but Phoenix's reaction to the photograph had confirmed her suspicions. This man was connected to Phoenix's past, and she needed answers. "What do you want?" she demanded through the closed door. "Just to talk," Blackwood replied. "About your dog. I think we got off on the wrong foot." "I have nothing to say to you." "I know where he came from," Blackwood persisted. "And I know what they did to him. You're not safe keeping him, Ms. Calloway." The use of her name, which she hadn't given him, sent a chill down Evie's spine. "I've called the police," she lied. "They're on their way." A pause. "No, you haven't. But that's smart. Being cautious." Something shifted in Blackwood's tone. "Look, I'm not who you think I am. I'm trying to build a case against Harker's operation. Your dog could be key evidence. Why should I believe you? Because if I worked for Harker, I wouldn't be standing here talking. Phoenix would already be gone." The logic was chilling but persuasive. Still, Evie hesitated. Phoenix's trembling body pressed against her leg. "I have information that could help protect both of you," Blackwood continued, "but not out here in the hallway." Against her better judgment, Evie opened the door a crack, chain still in place. Blackwood looked different somehow, the hard edges still present but his expression more open, almost desperate. "5 minutes," she conceded. In the hallway, not inside. When she stepped out, Phoenix tried to follow. To her surprise, he wasn't cowering from Blackwood now, but watching him with tense alertness. "My name is Thomas Blackwood," he began. "I'm an undercover agent with the State Bureau of Investigation. For the past 8 months, I've been gathering evidence against Ellis Harker's dogfighting operation." "Prove it," Evie demanded. Blackwood carefully reached into his jacket, producing a badge and identification. They looked authentic, but Evie remained skeptical. "I've been working to infiltrate Harker's inner circle," he continued. "We've known about the fighting for years, but could never get enough evidence for a conviction. The operation is sophisticated. They move locations, use burner phones, pay off local officials." "What does this have to do with Phoenix?" Blackwood's eyes shifted to the dog. "He wasn't always Phoenix. They called him Destroyer, not because he was a fighter, but because he destroyed the fighter's confidence." His voice softened. "He was a show dog originally. German Shepherd champion stolen from a breeder in Kentucky. Harker uses stolen purebreds as bait dogs. It's some kind of sick power play, breaking something beautiful. Phoenix had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on Blackwood. "How do you know all this?" Evie asked. "Because I was there for part of it. Had to be, to maintain my cover." Self-loathing flashed across Blackwood's face. "I've seen things I'll never forget, all to build this case. When Phoenix escaped or was dumped, I thought he might be the evidence we needed, a living witness." "He can't testify," Evie pointed out. "No, but his injuries tell the story. The vet records, the documented abuse patterns, combined with other evidence, it could be enough for a warrant. Enough to bring the whole operation down." Despite her lingering suspicion, pieces were falling into place. Phoenix's reaction to the photograph, Harold Sullivan's investigation, Dr. Anderson's warnings. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. Blackwood crouched slowly to Phoenix's level, maintaining a respectful distance. "Because I've been trying to save dogs like him for 3 years, and because—" his voice cracked slightly. "I've been waiting for someone to care enough about one of these dogs to actually fight back." Phoenix took a hesitant step toward Blackwood, nose working cautiously. The gesture, small as it was, carried weight. Phoenix's judgment of character had proven remarkably sound. "If what you're saying is true," Evie said, "then we're both in danger." Blackwood nodded grimly. "Harker doesn't know I'm law enforcement, but he knows someone's been asking about the operation. He's getting paranoid, covering tracks. A dog like Phoenix, with visible evidence of the fighting, is a liability he can't afford. What do you suggest? Document everything, keep Phoenix safe, and let me continue my investigation." He handed her a card with a number written on the back. "This is my secure line. If anything happens, anything at all, call immediately." As Blackwood turned to leave, he added, "Be careful who you trust in this town, Miss Calloway. The roots of corruption run deep." After he was gone, Evie leaned against her door, mind reeling. Phoenix pressed against her leg, more for comfort than protection now. "What have we gotten ourselves into, boy?" she whispered. Phoenix had no answer, but his warm presence grounded her. Whether Blackwood was telling the truth or spinning an elaborate trap, one thing remained certain: Phoenix deserved justice, and she was committed to seeing he got it. That evening, she called Dr. Anderson, sharing an edited version of Blackwood's visit, omitting his claim of being an undercover agent. "Be careful, Evie," Dr. Anderson cautioned. "Men like Blackwood, they're dangerous players in a dangerous game." "I think Phoenix is evidence of something terrible," she replied. "And I think people know it." The line went quiet for several seconds. "Perhaps," Dr. Anderson finally said, "it would be better to let sleeping dogs lie, for everyone's safety." Something in his tone raised the hairs on Evie's neck. "Robert, is there something you're not telling me?" "Just be careful," he repeated before ending the call. That night, Phoenix refused to sleep, pacing between windows and doors with nervous energy. Evie found herself unable to rest as well. Harold Sullivan's files spread before her, questions multiplying faster than answers. Who could she truly trust? Blackwood with his convenient badge and compelling story. Dr. Anderson with his vague warnings and sudden reluctance. Even Grace with her dead husband's files and cryptic comments. Phoenix finally settled beside her, his head on her lap, eyes still watchful. Whatever came next, Evie realized, they would face it together. Two broken souls finding strength in each other's company. "We'll get through this," she promised him, stroking his scarred head. "One way or another, we'll make it right." The following days brought an uneasy routine. Evie continued Phoenix's rehabilitation exercises, careful to vary their walking routes and times. She avoided the clinic when possible, using vacation days accumulated over months of rarely taking time off. Dr. Anderson called twice, his concern seemingly genuine, but something in his voice kept Evie's guard raised. Trust, once questioned, proved difficult to restore. Phoenix continued to improve physically, though his nightmares persisted. Some nights, Evie would wake to find him trembling beside her bed, seeking comfort from terrors she could only imagine. Other nights, his vigilance was almost unnerving, standing at windows or doors, ears alert as if expecting danger. Grace Sullivan became their unexpected ally, her weathered face appearing regularly at Evie's door with homemade dog treats and small offerings of information gleaned from decades in Cedar Grove. "Ellis Harker's hosting one of his business retreats this weekend," she informed Evie one morning, voice lowered conspiratorially. "Bunch of fancy cars headed toward that property near the Kentucky line. Happens every few months." "How do you know?" "Betty at the gas station. Her nephew works security for Harker's events." Grace's expression darkened. "Poor boy doesn't know half of what goes on, I suspect. Or maybe he does, and that's why he drinks himself stupid every Sunday after." Evie had been poring over Harold Sullivan's files each night after Phoenix settled, piecing together fragments of the former sheriff's investigation. The picture that emerged was disturbing. A network of properties, shell companies, and suspicious financial transactions centered around Ellis Harker. Harold had meticulously documented everything, but as Evie studied his notes, she noticed a curious gap. For all his detailed investigation into Harker's operation, he'd written almost nothing about local connections, the people in Cedar Grove who must have known or participated. Why wouldn't he document local involvement? She mused aloud one evening. Phoenix, lying nearby, lifted his head at her voice. The question nagged at her. An operation this size couldn't function without local support. Law enforcement turning blind eyes, veterinary services for valuable fighting dogs, disposal of evidence. Someone in Cedar Grove had to be involved. With growing unease, Evie realized she needed to know more about Dr. Anderson. 10 years in the same small town meant connections, perhaps entanglements she'd been naive to overlook. The Cedar Grove Library maintained archives of the local newspaper going back decades. On her next day off, Evie spent hours scrolling through microfilm, Phoenix safely at home with Grace keeping watch. She found what she was looking for in editions from 7 years prior, a small article about a charity fundraiser hosted by Ellis Harker. In the accompanying photograph, Dr. Robert Anderson stood smiling beside Harker, both men holding an oversized check for the local animal shelter. Her stomach twisted. One photograph didn't prove collusion, but it established a connection Dr. Anderson had never mentioned. Combined with his reluctance to pursue Phoenix's case and his increasingly insistent suggestions that she let it go, the implications were troubling. That evening she called the number Blackwood had given her. "I need to know about Dr. Robert Anderson," she said when he answered. "Is he involved?" A pause. "Not on the phone," Blackwood replied. "Meet me tomorrow. Riverfront Park, East End, 10 a.m. Riverfront Park sat on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, a stretch of land alongside the Cumberland River frequented mainly by fishermen. When Evie arrived with Phoenix the next morning, Blackwood was already there, seated on a weathered bench overlooking the slow-moving water. "You've been doing research," he observed as she approached. "I found a connection between Dr. Anderson and Harker." Blackwood nodded grimly. "It goes deeper than a photograph. Anderson provides veterinary services to Harker's operation, medication, treatment for valuable fighting dogs, disposal of the ones who don't survive." The confirmation hit Evie like a physical blow. "But he saved Phoenix. He's been helping with his rehabilitation." "Guilt, maybe. Or something more calculated." Blackwood glanced at Phoenix, who was watching him with cautious attention. "Anderson's in a precarious position. If Harker's operation goes down, he could face charges as an accessory. But if he helped create evidence against Harker, you think he's using Phoenix, using me to save himself? It's possible. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. Not everyone involved in these operations is a monster, Ms. Calloway. Some get pulled in gradually, small compromises that become larger ones, until they're trapped in something they never intended to join. Phoenix had wandered to the river's edge, his damaged leg less pronounced now but still evident in his gait. The morning sun caught his coat, highlighting the healthy shine that had replaced the matted filth of their first meeting. Watching him, Evie felt a fierce protectiveness that transcended her original compassion. "What happens now?" she asked. "We're getting close to building our case," Blackwood explained. "Harker's hosting another event this weekend. We believe it's a major fight with participants coming from several states. If we can document it, get evidence of the fighting and the gambling—" "You're going?" He nodded. "It's what I've been working toward. But it's dangerous. If my cover is blown, things could get ugly fast. And what about Phoenix? Keep him safe. Keep documenting his recovery. And—" Blackwood hesitated. "Be prepared to testify about his condition when you found him. Your testimony, combined with the veterinary records, creates a timeline that connects directly to Harker's operation." As they spoke, Phoenix suddenly tensed, his attention fixed on something beyond the tree line. A moment later, Evie heard it too, the sound of an approaching vehicle. "We should go," Blackwood said quietly. "Separately. I'll contact you after the weekend, one way or another." As Evie led Phoenix back toward her car, the dog's reluctance was palpable. He kept looking back at Blackwood as if understanding the man was walking into danger on their behalf. "He'll be okay," she murmured, not believing it herself. The next 2 days passed with excruciating slowness. Evie called in sick to the clinic again, unwilling to face Dr. Anderson with what she now knew. Instead, she focused on organizing Harold Sullivan's files and her own documentation of Phoenix's condition, creating a chronology that might stand up in court. Phoenix seemed to absorb her anxiety, his own vigilance increasing. Twice she caught him standing rigidly by the window, staring at cars that lingered too long in the parking lot. His protective instincts, once buried beneath layers of trauma, were emerging more strongly each day. On Saturday night, unable to sleep, Evie sat on her small balcony with Phoenix beside her. The night was unusually warm for early autumn, the kind of evening that normally brought neighbors outside to socialize. But the complex was quiet, most windows dark. "Something doesn't feel right," she whispered to Phoenix. His ears twitched in response, his body alert beside her. The sound of a car door closing drew her attention to the parking lot. "Doctor." Anderson's familiar figure emerged from his sedan, moving with purpose toward her building. Phoenix growled low in his throat. "I know, boy," Evie murmured. "I don't trust him either now." The knock came moments later, 3 sharp raps. Evie hesitated, then went to the door, Phoenix at her heels. "Evie," Dr. Anderson said when she opened the door a crack, chain still in place. "Thank God you're home. We need to talk. It's urgent." "It's late, Robert. Can't it wait until morning?" "No." His normally composed demeanor had fractured, eyes darting past her into the apartment. "It's about Phoenix and Blackwood. You're in danger." Despite her suspicions, the genuine fear in his voice gave her pause. "What are you talking about?" "Not in the hallway." He glanced over his shoulder. "Please, 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, Evie removed the chain and stepped back. Phoenix positioned himself between them, not growling but watchful, ready. "Doctor." Anderson entered cautiously, respecting Phoenix's space. "You've been meeting with Blackwood," he said without preamble. "You need to stop. He's not who he claims to be." "And who is he, exactly?" "He works for Harker. Has for years. Dr. Anderson ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture of agitation she'd rarely seen from him. The badge, the undercover story, it's all fabrication to gain your trust. Why would he do that? Because Phoenix is valuable, not just as evidence, but because of what he knows. At Evie's confused expression, Dr. Anderson continued, "Fighting dogs are trained to respond to specific commands, specific handlers. Phoenix was different. He hesitated, an experiment of sorts. Harker was developing new training methods, and Phoenix was one of the test subjects." Phoenix had moved closer to Evie, pressing against her leg. "You seem to know a lot about it," she observed, voice carefully neutral. "First-hand knowledge, Robert?" The color drained from Dr. Anderson's face. "What has Blackwood told you?" "Enough to know you've been lying to me. You're involved with Harker's operation." For a moment he looked like he might deny it. Then his shoulders sagged. "It's complicated, Evie. I never wanted to be part of it. But in a town this size with a man like Harker," he shook his head, "you don't understand the position I was in." "Then explain it to me." Dr. Anderson sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 59 years. "It started small. Treating a valuable dog after hours, no questions asked. Good money. And I told myself it wasn't my business what happened to the animal afterward." The admission turned Evie's stomach, but she remained silent. Then it escalated. Regular services, disposal of dogs that didn't survive fights, supplying medications that wouldn't be traced. His voice dropped. "By the time I realized what I'd become part of, it was too late to walk away. Harker made that very clear." "And Phoenix? Where does he fit in?" Phoenix was different from the beginning. Most fighting dogs are trained to be aggressive, but he was being conditioned another way, to endure pain without fighting back. The perfect bait dog. Dr. Anderson's expression twisted with self-loathing. "I treated him several times before he disappeared. I assumed he'd died." Phoenix had begun trembling slightly, whether from recognition of his own story or reaction to Dr. Anderson's distress, Evie couldn't tell. "When you found him, I thought maybe it was a chance to make something right, to help at least one dog escape that hell." Dr. Anderson looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "But Blackwood has been watching, reporting back to Harker. Tonight is one of the major fights. While everyone's attention is there, Blackwood plans to take Phoenix and probably eliminate you as a witness." The accusation hung in the air between them. Evie thought of Blackwood's eyes when he spoke of the fighting operation, the self-loathing that mirrored what she now saw in Dr. Anderson. Could she have misjudged so completely? "Why should I believe you now?" she asked. "Because I'm trying to save both of you." Dr. Anderson stood abruptly. "We need to get Phoenix out of town tonight. I have a colleague in Nashville who can keep him safe until—" The sound of breaking glass interrupted him, a window shattering in the bedroom. Phoenix exploded into motion, barking fiercely as he charged toward the sound. Evie ran after him, heart pounding. A masked figure was climbing through the broken window, something metallic gleaming in his hand. Phoenix launched himself at the intruder without hesitation, all his previous fear transformed into protective fury. The man shouted in pain as Phoenix's teeth found his arm. Dr. Anderson appeared beside Evie, pulling her back. "We need to go, now!" "Phoenix!" Evie called. The dog backed away from the intruder, who was now cursing and clutching his bleeding arm. Phoenix retreated to Evie's side, hackles still raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. They fled through the front door, Dr. Anderson leading them toward his car. The night air carried sounds of confusion, doors opening, voices calling questions. Grace Sullivan stood on her porch in a bathrobe, eyes wide with concern. "Evie, what's happening?" "Call the police!" Evie shouted as she urged Phoenix into the back seat of Dr. Anderson's car. As they pulled away, Evie looked back to see a second figure emerging from her apartment building. Even at a distance, she recognized Blackwood's tall form. He wasn't running after them or shouting. He simply stood watching their departure, something unreadable in his posture. "Where are we going?" she demanded, as Dr. Anderson accelerated onto the main road. "Somewhere safe," he replied, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "I have a cabin about an hour from here. No one knows about it. Not even Harker." Phoenix was unusually quiet in the back seat, his vigilance evident in the rigid set of his body. The events had unfolded too quickly for Evie to process completely. Had Dr. Anderson just saved them from Blackwood's betrayal, or was this another layer of manipulation? "How did you know they would come tonight?" she asked. Dr. Anderson's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Harker called me earlier, asked if I'd treated Phoenix recently, if the dog showed signs of recognizing specific commands. He was unusually interested in the dog's cognitive abilities." "And that made you suspicious?" "It confirmed what I'd feared, that Phoenix wasn't just a bait dog. He was part of something bigger." He glanced at her briefly. "Harker's been experimenting with training techniques, using dogs to transport and hide things, drugs, money. Phoenix was one of the early test subjects before they decided he wasn't aggressive enough." In the back seat, Phoenix had pressed himself against the door as far from Dr. Anderson as the space allowed. "He still doesn't trust you," Evie observed. "Would you, in his position?" Dr. Anderson's voice was heavy with resignation. "I treated his wounds, but I sent him back to that hell every time. I'm not the hero of this story, Evie." The rural roads grew narrower as they drove, streetlights giving way to darkness broken only by their headlights. Phoenix had begun to pant lightly, his anxiety palpable in the confined space. "How much further?" Evie asked, reaching back to reassure the dog. 20 minutes or so. It's remote. That's the point." As the car rounded a bend, headlights suddenly illuminated their vehicle from behind, closing rapidly. "We're being followed, Doctor," Anderson said tensely, accelerating. The pursuing vehicle drew closer, high beams blinding in the rearview mirror. Phoenix began to bark, the sound sharp with alarm. "Hold on," Dr. Anderson warned, taking a sudden turn onto an unmarked dirt road. The car bounced violently over the uneven surface, trees scraping the sides as the path narrowed. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle hesitated, then followed. "They know where we're going," Evie realized with dawning horror. Dr. Anderson's expression confirmed her fear. "That's not possible unless—" The road ahead was suddenly blocked by another vehicle, its headlights illuminating the inside of their car with harsh brightness. Dr. Anderson slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on loose gravel before coming to a stop mere feet from the blockade. "Run," he told Evie, voice tight with fear. "Take Phoenix and run into the woods. The cabin is a half-mile that way." He pointed toward a dense section of forest. "I'll hold them off." "Robert." "Go," he insisted. "Whatever I've done wrong, let me do this one thing right." Evie hesitated only a moment before opening her door. "Phoenix, come!" The dog leapt from the back seat, pressing close to her side as they plunged into the darkness of the forest. Behind them, she heard car doors opening, men's voices raised in anger. Then Dr. Anderson's voice, surprisingly steady. "She's gone. The dog, too. But I know where Harker keeps his records." Evie pushed deeper into the trees, Phoenix a shadow beside her. The forest floor was treacherous in the darkness, roots reaching to trip them, branches scraping at their faces. Phoenix navigated with more confidence than she could muster, occasionally tugging her sleeve to guide her around obstacles his superior senses detected. A gunshot cracked through the night, freezing them both in place. Then another. The sounds echoed among the trees, making it impossible to determine their direction or distance. "Oh, God," Evie whispered. Phoenix pressed against her, trembling but alert. They continued forward, slower now, every sense straining for signs of pursuit. The forest seemed to close around them, the darkness absolute save for occasional glimpses of moonlight through the canopy. Phoenix stayed close, his damaged leg clearly paining him, but his determination unwavering. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, they emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a modest cabin, its windows dark. "Is this it?" Evie whispered to Phoenix, as if he might confirm their location. The dog's attention was fixed behind them, ears alert for sounds of pursuit. The cabin door was locked, but Evie found a key beneath a flower pot, exactly where someone like Dr. Anderson would hide it, she thought with a pang. Inside, the space was simple but neat. One room with a kitchenette, small bathroom, and basic furnishings. No electricity, but an oil lamp stood ready on the table. With shaking hands, Evie lit the lamp, keeping the flame low to minimize visible light from outside. Phoenix circled the small space, sniffing cautiously, his tension evident in every line of his body. "What do we do now?" Evie asked the empty room. Phoenix had no answer, but he settled beside her when she sank onto the edge of the bed, his warm presence a small comfort in the chaos their lives had become. Outside, the forest had fallen silent. No pursuing footsteps, no searching voices. Even the night creatures seemed to hold their breath, as if sensing the human drama unfolding in their midst. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, Evie studied Phoenix's face. The intelligent eyes that had seen such cruelty, the scars that told his story of survival. Whatever happened next, she realized, her fate was now inextricably bound with his. They would face it together, two survivors against a darkness neither had created but both understood all too well. "We'll be okay," she told him, not knowing if it was true but needing to believe it. Phoenix rested his head on her knee in response, a gesture of trust that meant more than words ever could. Dawn broke with agonizing slowness, gray light seeping through the cabin's small windows. Evie hadn't slept, her body too charged with adrenaline, her mind racing through scenarios each more troubling than the last. Phoenix had maintained his vigilant position by the door, rising occasionally to circle the cabin's perimeter before returning to his post. The gunshots still echoed in her memory. Had they killed Dr. Anderson? Was Blackwood among the pursuers? The tangled web of loyalties and betrayals left her unsure whom to trust, if anyone. Her phone had no signal in this remote location. Exactly why Dr. Anderson had chosen it as a hideaway, she supposed. The isolation that had seemed protective now felt like a trap. Without communication, without transportation, they were effectively stranded. "We need a plan," she told Phoenix as sunlight finally breached the tree line. The German shepherd watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, his scarred face somehow noble despite, or perhaps because of, everything he'd endured. The cabin's supplies were minimal but thoughtful. Bottled water, canned food, basic first aid. Whoever had stocked it had prepared for emergency rather than comfort. Evie found an old topographical map tacked to the wall, yellowed with age but detailed enough to show their approximate location, about 15 miles from Cedar Grove, deep in the forested hills that locals called the Hollows. As she studied possible routes back to civilization, a sound from outside froze her in place, the distant but unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Phoenix was instantly alert, a low growl building in his throat. Evie extinguished the lamp and moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the faded curtain. Through the trees she could make out a vehicle approaching slowly along the narrow access road. Not Dr. Anderson's sedan. This was larger, a dark SUV moving with deliberate purpose. "Back door?" she whispered to herself, scanning the cabin, but there was only the one entrance, the windows too small for quick escape. Making a split-second decision, Evie grabbed her jacket and Phoenix's leash. "Come on, boy," she murmured, leading him toward the rear of the cabin, where a small window in the bathroom might offer escape. Phoenix followed without hesitation, his trust in her absolute, despite their dire circumstances. The bathroom window was narrow, but not impossible, for her, at least. Phoenix was another matter. As the sound of the vehicle grew louder, then stopped, Evie made quick calculations. If she could get out first, then help Phoenix through. A sharp knock at the cabin door shattered her planning. Phoenix's growl deepened, his body tense but positioned protectively in front of her. "Ms. Calloway?" A familiar voice called. "It's Thomas Blackwood." "I know you're in there." Evie's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. If Blackwood was here to harm them, hiding was pointless. He clearly knew the cabin's location. If he was truly an ally, as he'd claimed— "I'm alone," Blackwood continued. "Dr. Anderson sent me. We don't have much time." The mention of Dr. Anderson gave her pause. Cautiously, Evie approached the cabin door, Phoenix at her side. "Prove you're alone," she called. "I'm standing on the porch, hands visible," he replied. "You can check through the window." Evie peered through the dusty side window. Blackwood stood as promised, hands raised to shoulder height, alone on the small porch. No visible weapon, though that meant little. He was physically imposing enough without one. "What happened to Dr. Anderson?" she demanded through the closed door. A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. "He's alive but injured. He's being treated at Cedar Grove Memorial." He told them he was the victim of a robbery attempt. "And the men who followed us?" "Harker's security team. They've returned to the main property for now, but they'll be back. We need to move quickly." Evie hesitated, weighing her options. Phoenix was watching Blackwood through the window, his posture alert but not aggressive, a subtle but significant distinction. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm still your best chance of getting both you and Phoenix out of this alive," Blackwood answered simply. "And because if I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't be standing here talking through a door." The logic was undeniable, if cold. With Phoenix still at her side, Evie finally unlocked the door, opening it just enough to face Blackwood directly. His appearance was markedly different from their previous encounters. Tension lined his face, and a dark bruise was forming along his jawline. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "What happened last night?" she asked. "Harker discovered my investigation. Someone tipped him off. Probably someone at the local police department. When he realized I was gathering evidence against the fighting operation, he sent men to eliminate potential witnesses." Blackwood's gaze dropped to Phoenix, including Phoenix, who they believe was trained to respond to specific commands that could implicate Harker directly. "And Dr. Anderson?" "A complicated man." Blackwood's expression hardened. "He's been part of Harker's operation for years, providing veterinary services, covering up evidence. But when Phoenix resurfaced, when you found him and began rehabilitation, something changed. Anderson started keeping detailed records of the dog's injuries, documenting evidence he'd previously helped conceal." He was building a case against Harker, Evie realized. "Or against himself," Blackwood corrected. "Creating a narrative where he was an unwilling participant, perhaps even a hero. Insurance in case the operation was exposed." Phoenix had moved closer to Blackwood, sniffing cautiously at his pants leg. The dog's behavior continued to confuse Evie, fearful of Dr. Anderson despite the veterinarian's care, yet seemingly accepting of Blackwood despite his connection to the fighting ring. "Phoenix recognizes me from the facility," Blackwood explained, noticing her observation. "But unlike most humans he encountered there, I never harmed him." "You said you were undercover." "I am. State Bureau of Investigation. working to build a case against Harker for the past 3 years. It's taken that long to infiltrate his operation, gain enough trust to access the fighting events. Why come for us now? Why not wait until you had enough evidence? Because the timeline accelerated when Harker discovered my real purpose. Blackwood glanced toward the road, clearly anxious about their exposed position. I have documentation, financial records, photographs of the fighting facility, testimony from former participants. With Phoenix as living evidence and your testimony about finding him, we can finally bring charges that will stick. Where would we go? Evie asked, still not fully convinced. I have a safe house arranged through the Bureau. You and Phoenix would stay there until the case goes to trial. He hesitated. It could be months. The implication hung heavy in the air. Months away from her life in Cedar Grove. Months in hiding. Evie looked down at Phoenix, who had positioned himself between them, not threatening Blackwood but clearly still protective of her. What about Grace? My job? My apartment? All compromised, Blackwood said bluntly. Harker knows where you live, where you work, and he's desperate enough now to eliminate any threat. The harsh reality settled like a stone in Evie's stomach. She'd rebuilt her life in Cedar Grove after escaping her marriage, the small apartment, the job at the clinic, even friendships like the one with Grace. Now she was facing another uprooting, another reinvention. I need to think, she said. We don't have time, Blackwood insisted. Harker's men will return, and my cover is blown. This is our window, perhaps our only one. Phoenix pressed against her leg, a warm reminder of what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about her safety, or even justice in the abstract. This was about Phoenix and all the other dogs still suffering in Harker's operation. Okay, she finally said. But I need to contact Grace somehow, let her know I'm safe. Once we're secure, I'll arrange it. Blackwood gestured toward his vehicle. We should go. Now. The SUV was government-issued, its interior utilitarian but comfortable. Phoenix hesitated at the open door, perhaps remembering their harrowing escape the night before. With gentle encouragement from Evie, he finally jumped into the back seat, positioning himself so he could see both occupants of the front seats. As they pulled away from the cabin, Evie felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. They were moving, acting rather than hiding, but toward what future remained unclear. Tell me about the training, she said as they navigated the rough forest road. Dr. Anderson mentioned Phoenix was part of an experiment of some kind. Blackwood's expression darkened. Harker was developing a new application for fighting dogs. Most are trained for aggression, but a select few were conditioned differently, trained to recognize specific commands that would trigger certain behaviors. What kinds of behaviors? Transportation, primarily. A dog that could carry packages through areas where humans would be noticed. A dog trained to hide objects in specific locations when given the command. Blackwood glanced in the rearview mirror at Phoenix. They targeted intelligent breeds like German shepherds, especially those with show training who already understood complex commands. That's why Phoenix was stolen. Exactly. He had the foundation they needed. Intelligence, trainability, physical capability. What they didn't count on was his temperament. Phoenix refused to become aggressive, even under the most brutal conditioning. Something like admiration entered Blackwood's voice. They broke his body, but never his spirit. Phoenix was watching the passing landscape, his posture more relaxed now that they were moving away from the cabin. Occasionally his gaze would shift to Blackwood, assessing. How close are we to having enough evidence? Evie asked. Very. The documentation I've gathered over 3 years, combined with Phoenix's physical condition and your testimony about finding him, it's compelling. But what would cement the case is proof of Phoenix's specialized training. What do you mean? Blackwood hesitated. If Phoenix still responds to the commands they taught him, it creates a direct link to Harker's operation. It proves he came from there specifically, not just any fighting ring. The suggestion made Evie uncomfortable. You want to trigger his trauma after everything he's been through? Not trauma, Blackwood clarified quickly. These weren't pain-based commands. They were rewards-based, things he would do to receive positive reinforcement. Still, Evie couldn't shake her unease. Phoenix had made such progress, had begun to trust again. The thought of deliberately invoking his past, even without pain, felt like a betrayal. They had reached a paved road now, merging onto a highway that would take them out of the county. Phoenix had settled in the back seat, his vigilance easing as the familiar forests of Cedar Grove receded behind them. "Where exactly is this safe house?" Evie asked. "About 3 hours north, just across the Kentucky border. Bureau-maintained property completely off the grid. You'll both be safe there." The miles passed in tense silence, Evie's mind churning through the rapid changes of the past 24 hours. So focused was she on their immediate circumstances that she almost missed the significance when Blackwood took an unexpected exit. "This isn't the route to Kentucky," she noted, suddenly alert. "We need to make a stop first," Blackwood explained. "Secure additional evidence from my apartment before Harker's men get to it." The explanation seemed reasonable, but something in his tone triggered Evie's caution. Phoenix had noticed the change too, his body tensing in the back seat. "Is that safe? If your cover is blown—" "It's a calculated risk," Blackwood admitted. "But the evidence there could be the difference between Harker serving years versus decades." They were entering a residential area now, older homes set back from tree-lined streets. Blackwood drove with purpose, clearly familiar with the neighborhood. Phoenix had moved to the window, nose working as he processed new scents. "Wait in the car," Blackwood instructed as he pulled into the driveway of a modest bungalow. "I'll be 5 minutes tops." As he disappeared into the house, Evie turned to Phoenix. "What do you think, boy? Is he telling the truth?" Phoenix's attention remained fixed on the house, his expression unreadable. Evie checked her phone. Still no signal. The isolation that had seemed protective now felt like another form of vulnerability. 5 minutes stretched to 10. Unease crept along Evie's spine. Just as she was debating whether to go after Blackwood or drive away, the front door opened. Blackwood emerged, carrying a small duffel bag, his expression grim. "We need to move," he said as he slid back into the driver's seat. "Someone's been here already. My files are gone." "Harker's men?" "Most likely." "They're moving faster than I expected." He reversed out of the driveway with barely contained urgency. "The safe house is our only option now." They rejoined the highway, Blackwood pushing well above the speed limit. Phoenix had grown restless in the back seat, moving from window to window, his anxiety palpable. "He senses something's wrong," Evie observed. Blackwood glanced in the rearview mirror. "Dogs have better instincts than we do sometimes, especially ones like Phoenix who've had to develop those instincts to survive." As they approached a highway junction, a dark sedan pulled onto the road behind them, closing the distance with unsettling determination. "We're being followed," Blackwood stated flatly, accelerating further. Phoenix barked sharply, the sound startling after hours of his silence. Evie turned to see the sedan gaining on them, close enough now to make out 2 figures in the front seat. "Harker's security," Blackwood confirmed, voice tight. "They must have been watching my apartment." The next few minutes unfolded with nightmarish intensity. Blackwood executed a series of rapid turns, trying to lose their pursuers through increasingly rural back roads. The sedan stayed with them, professional in their pursuit. Phoenix had begun to pant anxiously, bracing himself against the vehicle's violent movements. "There's a state police barracks about 10 miles ahead," Blackwood said, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "If we can reach it—" The impact came without warning, the sedan ramming their rear bumper with enough force to send them fishtailing. Evie grabbed for Phoenix, trying to stabilize him as the SUV fought for traction. "Hold on!" Blackwood shouted, wrestling the vehicle back under control. The second impact struck their side, metal screaming against metal as the sedan tried to force them off the narrow road. Phoenix was barking frantically now, his earlier anxiety transformed into protective rage. Blackwood managed to accelerate out of the sedan's grip, putting momentary distance between them. "There's a turnoff ahead, a fire road into the state forest. It's our best chance." The SUV lurched onto the unpaved fire road, tires spinning on loose gravel before finding purchase. Behind them, the sedan hesitated at the turn, then followed, less suited to the rough terrain, but still dangerously persistent. "Who are these people?" Evie gasped, one arm still protectively wrapped around Phoenix. "Professional security with a lot to lose if Harker goes down," Blackwood replied grimly. "The kind who make problems disappear." The fire road narrowed, trees scraping the sides of the vehicle as they pushed deeper into the forest. The sedan had fallen back, but not abandoned pursuit. Phoenix had positioned himself against Evie, his body vibrating with tension but his protection instinct clearly engaged. Without warning, the road ahead disappeared, washed out by a recent storm, leaving a steep drop to a creek bed below. Blackwood slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding to a stop mere feet from disaster. "End of the line," he muttered, reaching beneath his seat to withdraw a handgun. "Stay with the vehicle. I'll deal with them." "Are you insane?" Evie grabbed his arm. "They'll kill you." "Better chance than sitting here waiting for them." Blackwood checked the weapon with practiced efficiency. "When I engage them, take Phoenix and run north through the forest. There's a ranger station about 2 miles that direction." Before Evie could argue further, Blackwood was out of the vehicle, positioning himself behind the SUV as the sedan approached. Phoenix growled, clearly agitated by the separation and the weapon. "We can't leave him," Evie told Phoenix, though the decision defied logic. Together, they slipped out of the passenger side, keeping the SUV between them and the approaching threat. The sedan stopped 30 yards back, its occupants assessing the situation. Phoenix pressed against Evie's leg, no longer growling but alert, focused. She could feel the subtle shift in his body language. Not fear now, but readiness. "Run, Evie," Blackwood ordered without looking back at her. "Now, while they're still in the vehicle." Instead, she moved to his side, Phoenix with her. "3 stands a better chance than 1. Blackwood's expression registered surprise, then grim acceptance. "Stay behind me." The sedan's doors opened simultaneously, 2 men emerging with weapons drawn. They moved with the coordinated precision of professional security, or something more lethal. "Agent Blackwood," one called. "This doesn't have to get messy. Just hand over the woman and the dog." "Federal agent," Blackwood responded, weapon steady. "You're interfering in an ongoing investigation. Put down your weapons." A harsh laugh was the only response. The men continued their advance, splitting to approach from different angles. Phoenix's attention shifted between them, his body coiled with tension. "Last chance," the spokesman offered. "Harker just wants what's his. The dog, specifically. The woman can walk away if she keeps her mouth shut." "That's not going to happen," Blackwood replied. What happened next unfolded with breathtaking speed. One of the men raised his weapon toward Blackwood. Phoenix launched forward with explosive force, a blur of motion that caught everyone by surprise, most of all the man now facing 80 pounds of determined German shepherd. The man fired wildly, the shot going wide as Phoenix crashed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The second man swung his weapon toward the dog. "Phoenix!" Evie screamed. Blackwood fired, the shot catching the second man in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Phoenix had the first man pinned, teeth bared inches from his throat but not biting, a display of restraint that seemed impossible given his past. "Don't move," Blackwood ordered, weapon trained on the wounded man. "Federal agent, this ends now." For one suspended moment, it seemed the confrontation had been resolved. Then the man beneath Phoenix made a desperate move, reaching for a backup weapon at his ankle. Phoenix reacted instantly, clamping powerful jaws around the man's wrist, not crushing, but immobilizing. The wounded second man, clutching his bleeding shoulder, assessed the situation and made his choice. Raising his hands in surrender, he sank to his knees. "Smart decision," Blackwood commented, moving forward to secure their weapons while keeping his own trained on them. "Evie, there's a first aid kit in the SUV, and zip ties in the glove compartment." Minutes later, both men were secured, the wounded one receiving basic treatment for his shoulder. Phoenix had returned to Evie's side, physically unharmed but trembling with residual adrenaline. "You're okay," she murmured, running gentle hands over him to confirm the absence of injuries. "You saved us." Blackwood had retrieved a satellite phone from the SUV, calling for backup and an extraction team. "State police will be here in 20 minutes, he informed Evie, along with bureau support. The immediate danger had passed, but the reality of their situation remained complex. Phoenix rested his head against Evie's leg, exhaustion finally overtaking his vigilance. She stroked his scarred head, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a broken, discarded creature in a dumpster to a protector willing to put himself in danger to save others. "He's remarkable," Blackwood observed, watching them. "Most dogs with his history would never recover enough to trust humans again, let alone protect them." "He's had plenty of reasons to give up on humanity," Evie agreed, "but somehow he still believes in second chances." As the sounds of approaching sirens filtered through the trees, Evie realized their ordeal was far from over. There would be statements to give, evidence to process, perhaps even a trial where she would have to relive finding Phoenix and everything that followed. But looking at the dog beside her, scarred but unbroken, vigilant but not vengeful, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The path that had begun in the rain behind a veterinary clinic had led them here, to this forest clearing, to this moment of truth. And though the journey ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Phoenix had found his purpose, and Evie had found hers. Not just survival, but justice. Not just healing, but transformation. The following weeks passed in a blur of official statements, safe houses, and uncertainty. Evie and Phoenix were relocated to a bureau-protected residence outside Louisville, Kentucky, a modest farmhouse surrounded by rolling fields that provided both security and space for Phoenix to heal from their ordeal. Though physically unharmed in the confrontation, the German Shepherd had experienced a setback in his emotional recovery, the violence triggering echoes of his traumatic past. "It's normal," Blackwood assured Evie during one of his weekly visits, watching Phoenix patrol the perimeter of the yard with methodical focus. "He's processing what happened, reconciling his protective instincts with his fear responses. Give him time." Time had become their most abundant resource. Days stretched into a strange new routine. Morning walks across dew-covered fields, carefully monitored visits from bureau psychologists for both Evie and Phoenix, and long evenings spent wondering what would become of their lives after this protective isolation ended. Blackwood brought updates when security protocols allowed. Ellis Harker had been arrested following a coordinated raid on his property during a major dogfighting event. The evidence was substantial. Financial records, dozens of scarred and injured dogs, fighting equipment, and eyewitness testimonies from several participants who'd chosen cooperation over prosecution. "Dr. Anderson is cooperating too," Blackwood revealed during his third visit. Full confession about his involvement, detailed records of every dog he treated for Harker's operation. "Will he serve time?" Evie asked, conflicted about the veterinarian whose moral compromises had nonetheless led to Phoenix's rescue. "Some," Blackwood nodded. "But his testimony is valuable enough that the prosecutors are inclined toward leniency, 5 years, possibly less, with good behavior." Phoenix had developed a curious relationship with Blackwood during these visits. Though still wary, he would accept the agent's presence with dignified tolerance, occasionally even allowing a careful pat on his shoulder, the least vulnerable part of his body. It was progress of a sort, another small healing in Phoenix's lengthy recovery. 6 weeks into their protective custody, Evie received unexpected news. Grace Sullivan had suffered a minor stroke, currently recovering at Cedar Grove Memorial Hospital. "She's been asking for you," Blackwood informed her. "Seems quite insistent, according to the Bureau's monitoring team." "I need to see her," Evie said immediately. Phoenix, sensing her distress, pressed against her leg in what had become his signature gesture of support. "It's risky," Blackwood cautioned. "The case is still developing. Harker may be in custody, but his network remains active. Grace is 82 years old and alone in this world. Her husband is gone. She has no children." Evie's voice hardened with determination. "I'm not abandoning her when she needs someone." The discussion escalated to Blackwood's superiors, eventually reaching a compromise. A brief, heavily monitored hospital visit, with Phoenix remaining at the safe house under protection. The separation anxiety this sparked in both of them was palpable. "I'll be back tonight," Evie promised Phoenix as she prepared to leave with Blackwood and another agent. The dog watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, understanding more than any animal should. When she finally turned to go, his soft whine of distress nearly broke her resolve. Cedar Grove Memorial was a small community hospital, its corridors quiet and dimly lit in the early evening hours. Evie found Grace in a private room, looking diminished against the white sheets, but still possessing that sharp gaze that missed nothing. "Took you long enough?" The elderly woman greeted her, voice slightly slurred from the stroke, but spirit undiminished. "Figured you might be dead in a ditch somewhere." The familiar bluntness brought unexpected tears to Evie's eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. Things got complicated." "Complicated," Grace repeated with a soft snort. "That's one word for it. Disaster might be another. Half the town's talking about nothing else." She patted the bed beside her. "Sit. Tell me about that brave dog of yours." For the next hour, under the watchful eye of Blackwood stationed outside the door, Evie shared a carefully edited version of their ordeal. Phoenix's recovery, their flight from Cedar Grove, the confrontation in the forest, each chapter of their journey laid out for Grace's shrewd assessment. "Harold would have appreciated that dog," Grace said when Evie finished. "Always said you could tell everything important about a person by how they treated animals. Phoenix chose right when he chose you." "I think it was the other way around," Evie smiled. "But we've been good for each other." Grace's expression suddenly turned serious, her age-spotted hand reaching for Evie's with surprising strength. "I need to tell you something. Something Harold discovered about Harker's operation before he died." Evie leaned closer, conscious of Blackwood's silhouette visible through the door's small window. "Harold believed someone high up was protecting Harker all these years, someone with real authority beyond local police." Grace's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He was building a case, gathering evidence, but his heart gave out before he could finish." "Did he identify this person?" Grace shook her head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Not directly. But he was investigating financial connections between Harker and a federal judge named William Calloway." The name hit Evie like a physical blow. William Calloway, her former father-in-law, a respected federal judge in the Eastern District of Kentucky, the man who had stood silently by during her divorce, never acknowledging the bruises his son Michael had inflicted, never intervening despite his position of authority. William Calloway, she repeated numbly. You're certain? Harold was meticulous about these things, Grace confirmed. He traced campaign contributions, property transactions through shell companies, offshore accounts, all connecting back to Harker and Judge Calloway. She squeezed Evie's hand. I'm sorry, dear. I know that name has painful associations for you. Evie's mind raced through implications. If Judge Calloway was protecting Harker's operation, possibly profiting from it, and if Michael had been involved as Dr. Anderson suggested, the connections formed a nauseating pattern. I need to tell Blackwood, she said, rising abruptly. Be careful, Grace warned. If Harold was right, you're dealing with someone who can make federal cases disappear with a single phone call. Blackwood received the information with careful neutrality, but Evie caught the slight tightening around his eyes that signaled its significance. We've suspected judicial interference, he admitted, as they drove back toward the safe house. Cases against Harker that should have proceeded but were mysteriously dropped. Judge Calloway's name has come up in our broader investigation. He's my ex-father-in-law, Evie said flatly, and my ex-husband Michael had connections to Harker, according to Dr. Anderson. This isn't coincidence. Blackwood's hands tightened on the steering wheel. No, it's not. After a moment's consideration, he added, this changes our security protocols. If Judge Calloway is involved and knows your connection to the case, the implication hung heavily between them. Not just Phoenix, but Evie herself represented a threat to powerful people, people with resources and influence far beyond Harker's local operation. They were halfway back to the safe house when Blackwood's secure phone rang. The brief conversation consisted mostly of terse acknowledgments, but Evie caught the change in his posture, the sudden tension in his jaw. What is it? She demanded when he disconnected. There's been a security breach at the safe house. His voice was professionally calm, but his increased speed told another story. Phoenix is secure, but we're being redirected to another location immediately. Fear clutched at Evie's chest. What happened? Is he hurt? He's unharmed, Blackwood assured her. But someone attempted entry approximately 40 minutes ago. The protection detail intercepted them. Them? How many? 2 individuals. Both apprehended. He hesitated before adding, one has been identified as Michael Calloway. The revelation struck Evie like a physical blow. Michael, her ex-husband, the man whose violence had driven her into military service as an escape, whose psychological torture had left scars deeper than any physical abuse, the man she'd spent 3 years rebuilding her life to forget. Michael knows about Phoenix? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. It appears so, Blackwood confirmed, and based on preliminary questioning, he was sent specifically to retrieve the dog. The pieces aligned with sickening clarity. Michael working for his father and Harker. Phoenix as evidence that could implicate them all. The personal connection that made Evie both witness and victim. Their new destination was a bureau-maintained apartment in downtown Louisville, a stark contrast to the rural safe house. Phoenix was already there when they arrived, visibly agitated but physically unharmed. His reaction upon seeing Evie was heartbreaking, a desperate whine followed by full-body trembling as he pressed against her, seeking reassurance after the separation and subsequent trauma. He protected the agents, reported the lead security officer, a woman named Martinez. When the intruders breached the perimeter, Phoenix alerted the team before they even triggered the motion sensors, then positioned himself between our people and the threat. Evie knelt beside Phoenix, examining him for any overlooked injuries. Finding none, she simply held him, feeling his racing heart gradually slow as he registered her safe return. The intruders? She asked, not looking up from Phoenix. In custody, Martinez confirmed. The one identified as Michael Calloway as being particularly uncooperative. keeps demanding legal representation from a specific attorney associated with Judge William Calloway. Blackwood and Martinez exchanged meaningful glances. "We've expedited the evidence processing," Blackwood explained to Evie. "Phoenix's veterinary records, your testimony, everything connected to the case. The Bureau Director has authorized special handling given the judicial connection." That night, in the sterile safety of the Bureau apartment, Evie lay awake while Phoenix maintained his vigilant position at the bedroom door. The day's revelations swirled through her mind like poisonous smoke. Michael had found her, had come specifically for Phoenix, which meant he knew exactly what Phoenix represented as evidence, which meant he had been directly involved in the fighting operation, perhaps even in Phoenix's abuse. The thought made her physically ill. Had she escaped one monster only to have him reappear in her life years later? And not just reappear, but reveal himself as connected to the very torture Phoenix had endured. Phoenix shifted in the darkness, moving from his post to approach the bed. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he rested his head on the mattress beside her hand, seeking connection. Evie stroked his scarred face, feeling the rough texture that would always mark him as a survivor. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Morning brought Blackwood and a bureau case officer named Reynolds, both wearing expressions that signaled significant developments. "Michael Calloway has offered information in exchange for consideration in his case," Reynolds explained without preamble. "He's implicated both Ellis Harker and Judge William Calloway in the dogfighting operation, providing specific details about financial arrangements, evidence suppression, and judicial interference." "He's turning on his own father?" Evie couldn't mask her surprise. Michael's loyalty to his powerful father had been absolute during their marriage, a cornerstone of the family dynamic that had made her own position so precarious. "Self-preservation," Blackwood observed dryly. "Michael Calloway is facing substantial federal charges. His father, meanwhile, has already begun distancing himself, claiming no knowledge of his son's unfortunate associations with Ellis Harker." "Classic narcissist behavior," Reynolds added. "When cornered, sacrifice others to save yourself, even family." Phoenix had positioned himself against Evie's leg, his body language conveying protective alertness rather than fear. His recovery continued to amaze her, the capacity to overcome trauma when given safety and consistency. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, one hand resting on Phoenix's head. "It means the case is expanding significantly," Reynolds explained. "Judicial corruption investigations involve multiple federal agencies, extensive evidence gathering. The timeline for resolution has extended considerably." The implications settled heavily. Their protective custody wouldn't end soon. Their lives would remain in this strange limbo while the legal machinery ground forward. "However," Blackwood interjected, "it also means we can consider a more comfortable arrangement for your continued protection, something less institutional than this apartment." A week later, Evie and Phoenix relocated to a small house on the outskirts of Louisville, still under bureau protection, but with a yard for Phoenix, a semblance of normalcy within their extraordinary circumstances. Blackwood had arranged for some of Evie's personal belongings to be retrieved from her Cedar Grove apartment, providing welcome familiarity in their temporary home. Phoenix adapted to the new environment with remarkable resilience, establishing perimeter checks that gradually decreased in frequency as he determined the space was secure. His protective instincts remained heightened, but his trust in Evie had deepened into something profound, a partnership forged through mutual rescue. 3 months into this new arrangement, Blackwood arrived with news that would alter their trajectory once again. The case against Ellis Harker had proceeded swiftly, his operation dismantled, his assets seized. Dozens of fighting dogs had been rescued, many beginning rehabilitation journeys similar to Phoenix's. Judge William Calloway faced federal corruption charges, his reputation in tatters as evidence of his protection racket emerged. And Michael Calloway had been murdered in federal custody, strangled by another inmate with connections to Harker's wider network. "The investigation into his death is ongoing," Blackwood explained, watching Evie carefully for her reaction. "But the immediate threat to you and Phoenix has diminished significantly with these developments." Phoenix, sensing the gravity of the conversation, had positioned himself beside Evie on the sofa, his warm presence a stabilizing force. Evie absently stroked his ears, processing the implications of Michael's death. She felt no grief, only a complex emptiness where fear had previously resided. "What happens now?" she asked. "You have options," Blackwood replied. "The protective custody arrangement can conclude if you wish. You could return to Cedar Grove, resume your position at the clinic. Dr. Anderson's practice has been taken over by a Dr. Wilson, who's expressed interest in maintaining your employment." The offer of normalcy, of returning to her interrupted life, should have felt like relief. Instead, Evie found herself hesitating, looking down at Phoenix's scarred face beside her. "And Phoenix? What happens to him after all this?" "Technically, Phoenix is evidence in an ongoing federal case," Blackwood explained. "But given the circumstances and his unique bond with you, arrangements could be made for permanent adoption once the case concludes." Phoenix shifted slightly, pressing closer to Evie's side. His amber eyes, once dull with pain and fear, now watched her with clear intelligence and trust. In this dog, this survivor who had every reason to hate humans but had chosen to protect them instead, Evie recognized something of herself, the refusal to be defined by past trauma, the capacity to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. "I don't think Cedar Grove is right for either of us anymore," she said finally. "Too many shadows there." Blackwood nodded, unsurprised. "The Bureau can assist with relocation if you decide that's the best course. There are also opportunities, given your experience with Phoenix, that you might consider." "What kind of opportunities?" "There's increasing recognition of the therapeutic value of animals for trauma survivors," he explained. "Your military background, nursing experience, and success with Phoenix's rehabilitation, these skills are valuable. Several programs work specifically with rescued fighting dogs, rehabilitating them as therapy animals for PTSD patients." The possibility resonated in unexpected ways. Evie thought of Phoenix's gentle presence with Grace at the hospital, his intuitive understanding of human emotions, his remarkable journey from victim to healer. "I'd need training," she said, the idea taking root. "Certification. All arrangeable," Blackwood assured her. "Consider it the Bureau's way of expressing gratitude for your role in this case." That night, as autumn winds rattled the windows of their temporary home, Evie sat on the floor beside Phoenix's bed. A proper dog bed he now willingly used, though he still maintained his vigilant checks throughout the night. His head rested comfortably on her lap, eyes half closed in contentment. "What do you think, boy?" she asked softly. "Ready for a new chapter?" Phoenix's tail thumped once against the cushion, that same deliberate response he'd given in the dumpster on that rainy morning that now seemed a lifetime ago. A response that somehow conveyed more wisdom and certainty than words ever could. The path ahead remained uncertain. There would be testimony to give, a trial to endure, a new life to construct from the fragments of the old. But looking at Phoenix, his physical scars visible but his spirit unbroken, Evie felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before her marriage to Michael. They had both survived their respective hells. Both found strength they hadn't known they possessed. Both discovered capacity for trust that should have been destroyed by human cruelty. "Together, then," she whispered, sealing a covenant between them that transcended ordinary human-animal bonds. Phoenix sighed deeply, relaxing further into her touch. In that quiet moment of connection, the rain and the dumpster and all the darkness that followed seemed to recede, leaving only the simple truth of two damaged souls who had saved each other. And perhaps, in that salvation, found purpose greater than mere survival. Spring arrived in Asheville, North Carolina, with an explosion of dogwood blossoms and the sweet scent of magnolias. 6 months had passed since Evie and Phoenix had relocated to this mountain community, far enough from their past to feel safe, close enough to Kentucky for the occasional required court appearance as the case against Judge William Calloway and the remnants of Harker's network proceeded through the judicial system. Their new home sat on 3 acres at the edge of town, a modest farmhouse with a wraparound porch and room for Phoenix to run. The Bureau had assisted with the purchase as part of their witness relocation support, though Evie had insisted on assuming the mortgage herself. Independence mattered after months of protective custody. Phoenix's transformation continued to astonish everyone who met him. Though his right hind leg would always bear the telltale limp of his past abuse, his physical condition had otherwise flourished. His coat gleamed with health, muscle had replaced the skeletal frame Evie had first discovered, and while certain triggers still caused momentary anxiety, his resilience grew with each passing month. "You wouldn't know what he's been through unless you saw the scars," remarked Dr. Jennifer Walters, the veterinarian who had become both Phoenix's doctor and Evie's mentor in animal rehabilitation. "Physically, he's nearly a textbook example of a German Shepherd in his prime." The psychological scars ran deeper, of course. Phoenix still conducted perimeter checks of their property several times daily. Male strangers still received cautious assessment before acceptance. And sometimes, in the depths of night, Evie would wake to find Phoenix trembling beside her bed, haunted by dreams neither of them could articulate. But these episodes had grown increasingly rare as their new life took shape around them. Evie had enrolled in a certification program for animal-assisted therapy, combining her nursing background with specialized training in canine rehabilitation. Phoenix accompanied her to classes, an unofficial teaching assistant whose very presence demonstrated the healing potential of the human-animal bond. Their routine had developed a comfortable rhythm, mornings spent in training or classes, afternoons working with Phoenix on his therapy dog certification, evenings on the porch watching the sun set behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was a quieter existence than Cedar Grove, but one with purpose and peace that had previously eluded them both. Grace Sullivan had become a regular presence through weekly phone calls, her recovery from the stroke progressing steadily. "This town's not the same without you and that noble beast," she complained during their conversations. "Half the stories worth telling walked out when you two left." Cedar Grove itself had undergone significant changes in the aftermath of Harker's arrest. The dogfighting network's exposure had revealed corruption extending through local government, law enforcement, and business circles. A special election had replaced key officials, and the community was slowly rebuilding its identity separate from Harker's shadow. Dr. Anderson had received a 5-year sentence for his role in the operation, though his cooperation had spared him the harsher penalties others faced. In a letter forwarded through Blackwood, he had expressed genuine remorse and gratitude for Phoenix's recovery. Words Evie accepted but regarded with measured skepticism. Redemption, she had learned, was a journey rather than a declaration. As for Ellis Harker, his empire had crumbled spectacularly. Federal prosecutors had secured a 30-year sentence for charges ranging from animal cruelty to racketeering, illegal gambling, money laundering, and witness intimidation. At 62, it amounted to a life sentence, a fact that brought Evie no joy but a certain sense of completion. The case against Judge William Calloway proceeded more slowly, hampered by his considerable resources and connections within the judicial system. Each delay reinforced Evie's decision to rebuild her life elsewhere, beyond the reach of the Calloway family's lingering influence. Blackwood remained their connection to the ongoing investigation, his monthly visits evolving from official check-ins to something approaching friendship. Phoenix now greeted him with cautious acceptance rather than vigilant assessment, progress that Blackwood noted with quiet satisfaction. "He's becoming the dog he was always meant to be," he observed during his April visit, watching Phoenix patrol the backyard with confident purpose. "Before Harker's people got hold of him." "I'm not sure that dog exists anymore," Evie replied, leaning against the porch railing. "The Phoenix I found in that dumpster, the one who's been through hell and survived, that's who he is now. The scars are part of his story, not interruptions to it." Blackwood studied her with that perceptive gaze that had initially unnerved her. "You could be talking about yourself." "Maybe I am," she acknowledged with a small smile. "We've both learned to live with our histories." The therapeutic potential of their shared journey had begun to manifest in unexpected ways. Through Dr. Walters, Evie had connected with a local veterans support program seeking therapy animals for PTSD patients. Phoenix's intuitive response to emotional distress, his capacity to remain calm in the presence of psychological triggers, and his remarkable ability to distinguish between actual and perceived threats made him uniquely suited to the work. Their first official session had been with a Marine sergeant named Dawson, 3 tours in Afghanistan, leaving him hyper-vigilant and socially isolated. Phoenix had approached the tense young man with careful deliberation, maintaining respectful distance until invited closer. Something in the dog's measured movements, his watchful assessment balanced with willingness to engage, resonated with Dawson's military experience. "He's clearing the room," Dawson had observed with the ghost of a smile, "checking for threats before standing down." "He does that everywhere," Evie confirmed. "It's how he feels safe enough to relax." That simple exchange had opened a channel of communication Dawson's regular therapist had been attempting to establish for months. By the session's end, the Marine was calmly stroking Phoenix's ears while describing combat experiences he'd previously refused to discuss. Phoenix had stayed perfectly still beside him, occasionally making eye contact as if to say, "I understand. I've been there too." Word spread through the veterans community about the German Shepherd with the scarred body and gentle soul. Their weekly sessions expanded to twice weekly, then 3 times, with Phoenix demonstrating remarkable stamina for emotional labor that would have exhausted most therapy animals. "He knows what they need," Dr. Walters remarked after observing a particularly intense session with a female Army medic. "Watch how he positions himself, always between them and the door, always where they can see him. He's creating a safety zone." Phoenix's therapy work had attracted attention beyond the veterans program. A local journalist had written a feature about his journey from fighting ring to healing work, complete with before and after photographs that starkly illustrated his transformation. The article had gone viral, bringing unexpected attention and opportunities. Phoenix Rising, from bait dog to healer, had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms, drawing interest from animal welfare organizations nationwide. Offers came for book deals, documentary features, speaking engagements, attention that Evie largely deflected, protective of Phoenix's hard-won stability and their relative anonymity. But one invitation proved harder to dismiss. The National Association for Animal-Assisted Therapy had requested Phoenix as a demonstration dog for their annual conference in Washington, D.C., specifically highlighting his work with combat veterans. The event would draw professionals from across the country, potentially expanding the reach of their rehabilitation model. It would mean travel, crowds, unfamiliar environments, Evie told Phoenix, as if he could weigh the considerations. All things that might be challenging for you. Phoenix tilted his head at her tone, those intelligent amber eyes studying her face with his characteristic intensity. Despite her misgivings, Evie found herself considering the opportunity. Phoenix had exceeded every expectation for his recovery. Perhaps it was time to trust his resilience in more challenging environments. After consulting with Dr. Walters and Blackwood, who arranged additional security measures given the ongoing Callaway case, Evie accepted the invitation. Preparations began for their first significant journey beyond the safety of Asheville, a test of Phoenix's progress and their partnership in unfamiliar territory. The conference was scheduled for early June, giving them weeks to prepare Phoenix for the experience. Evie developed a systematic desensitization program, gradually introducing elements he would encounter. Larger crowds at local parks, recorded convention sounds played at increasing volume, practice sessions wearing his therapy dog vest for extended periods. Throughout these preparations, Phoenix demonstrated the adaptability that continued to amaze her. His confidence had grown tremendously since their arrival in Asheville, his trust in Evie's guidance allowing him to navigate situations that would have overwhelmed him months earlier. 3 weeks before the conference, Blackwood arrived with unexpected news. Judge William Callaway had accepted a plea agreement, avoiding trial in exchange for full cooperation regarding judicial interference in Harker's cases and extensive financial disclosures. "He'll serve 10 years, Blackwood explained, seated at Evie's kitchen table while Phoenix maintained his customary position at her side. "No possibility of parole, forfeiture of assets gained through illegal activities, permanent disbarment." 10 years doesn't seem adequate, Evie noted, remembering Grace's discoveries about the judge's protection of Harker's operation over decades. "It isn't," Blackwood acknowledged, "but his cooperation has implicated 3 other judges and a state prosecutor. The wider impact justifies the terms." The news brought mixed emotions. Relief that the case was concluding without a trial that would have required Phoenix as physical evidence. Frustration at what seemed like insufficient consequences, and a complicated emptiness where her fear of the Callaway family had resided for so long. "What does this mean for us?" she asked. "It means your formal obligations to the case are complete," Blackwood replied. "Your testimony has been preserved through depositions. Phoenix's medical records have been entered into evidence. There's no further legal requirement for either of you to participate." The words should have felt like liberation. Instead, Evie found herself asking, "And our protection status? The relocation support?" "Technically concluded with the plea agreement," Blackwood admitted. "But given the circumstances and Phoenix's value as a therapy animal, I've recommended continued security monitoring through the conference at minimum. After that," he hesitated, "it would be at your discretion whether to maintain contact with the Bureau." Phoenix shifted slightly against Evie's leg, perhaps sensing her unease. Since finding him in the dumpster, their lives had been defined by external forces, Harker's threats, protective custody, legal proceedings. The prospect of true independence carried its own uncertainty. "We'll be fine," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Phoenix and I have come too far to be derailed now." Blackwood nodded, understanding the pride behind her assertion. "The offer stands if you need anything. You've both earned that much." As June approached, Evie's focus narrowed to the upcoming conference and Phoenix's preparation. The plea agreement had lifted one weight while adding another, the recognition that their journey was entering a new phase, one defined by choice rather than necessity. The weekend before their scheduled departure for Washington, Phoenix experienced a setback that challenged Evie's confidence in their readiness. A thunderstorm, unusually severe for early summer, triggered Phoenix's most significant anxiety response in months. He paced frantically through the house, trembling violently at each thunderclap, reverting to behavior she hadn't seen since their days in protective custody. "It's okay," she soothed, sitting on the floor beside his favorite corner. "You're safe here." "We are both safe." Phoenix pressed against her, his powerful body shaking with fear that transcended rational reassurance. Something about the storm had connected to his deepest trauma, perhaps reminiscent of the fighting ring or his time abandoned in the elements. For hours, Evie simply sat with him, providing the steady presence that had been their mutual anchor through every challenge. When the storm finally passed near dawn, Phoenix collapsed into exhausted sleep, his head heavy on Evie's lap. Watching his chest rise and fall with each breath, she confronted the possibility that they weren't ready for the conference, that Phoenix's recovery, remarkable as it was, remained fragile in ways she couldn't always predict. Dr. Walters arrived later that morning for their scheduled pre-conference assessment. Evie described the night's regression with reluctant honesty. "Setbacks are part of healing," the veterinarian reminded her, observing Phoenix's subdued but stable behavior. "The question isn't whether they occur, but how quickly recovery follows." Throughout their session, Phoenix demonstrated his usual responsiveness to commands and therapy exercises, showing no lingering effects from the night's distress. His resilience remained his most remarkable quality, the capacity to experience fear without being defined by it. "I think you're both ready," Dr. Walters concluded. "But ultimately, that decision belongs to you, Evie. You know Phoenix better than anyone." The question lingered as Evie packed their supplies for Washington. Phoenix's therapy vest and credentials, his comfort items, the documentation of his remarkable journey. Was she pushing too fast for a milestone that mattered more to her than to Phoenix? Was her desire to showcase his recovery motivated by pride rather than therapeutic potential? Phoenix watched her preparations from his bed near the window, his expression contemplative. In moments like these, Evie found herself wondering what wisdom lay behind those amber eyes, what understanding of human complexity this extraordinary dog had developed through his experiences. "What do you think, boy?" she asked, holding up his therapy vest. "Are we ready for this?" Phoenix rose from his bed and approached with dignified purpose, pressing his head against her hand in what had become his clearest expression of partnership. Not merely acceptance or obedience, but active engagement with their shared path. The gesture settled her doubts. They had faced greater challenges together, life-threatening danger, physical recovery, the psychological minefield of trauma. A conference, however demanding, was simply another step in their continuing journey. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains in shades of amber that matched Phoenix's eyes, Evie sat on the porch with her loyal companion beside her. Their lives had been transformed completely since that rainy morning behind the veterinary clinic, both broken in different ways, both healing through their unlikely connection. "Whatever happens in Washington," she told Phoenix, stroking his scarred head, "we've already succeeded where it matters most." Phoenix sighed contentedly, his body relaxed in a way that would have seemed impossible during those first terrified weeks. His vigilance remained, but it had matured into something balanced rather than desperate, the watchfulness of a guardian rather than a victim. As darkness settled over their mountain sanctuary, Evie felt a quiet certainty that had been absent for much of her adult life. They were ready for Washington, ready for whatever came next. Not because circumstances were perfect or healing complete, but because they had learned to navigate imperfection together. Phoenix had risen from the ashes of cruelty not once but repeatedly, each setback followed by renewed determination. In his resilience, Evie had found a model for her own recovery. From her marriage, from the violence of her military service, from the weight of bearing witness to suffering she couldn't always prevent. Tomorrow, they would continue preparations for Washington. Next week, they would face the challenge of new environments and public scrutiny. But tonight, in this peaceful moment of connection, both had found something that transcended their respective traumas. Purpose that transformed suffering into meaning, and companionship that made even the darkest nights navigable. Phoenix's head rested heavily against her leg, his eyes half closed in contentment. The gesture contained everything their journey had taught them: that trust could be rebuilt from ruins, that scars could become testimony rather than simply damage, and that sometimes the most profound healing came through helping others find their own path back from darkness. Washington, D.C. in early June was awash with tourists and the humid promise of summer. The National Association for Animal-Assisted Therapy had arranged accommodations at a pet-friendly hotel near the convention center, with a corner room specifically selected for Phoenix's comfort, minimal hallway traffic, a small outdoor terrace, and extra space for his bed and familiar items. Evie had prepared meticulously for the journey. Phoenix's favorite blanket bearing the sense of home, the specific food that caused no digestive upset, toys that provided comfort rather than excitement, and the precise medications Dr. Walters had prescribed to ease potential travel anxiety. Yet the 8-hour drive from Asheville had proven remarkably uneventful. Phoenix had spent most of it calmly watching the changing landscape through his window, occasionally resting his head on Evie's thigh when she wasn't shifting gears. "He's a different dog than the one I first met," Blackwood observed when meeting them at the hotel. The agent had arranged to attend the conference, ostensibly as additional security but equally driven by personal investment in Phoenix's journey. More confident in his own skin. "The nightmares still come sometimes," Evie admitted as they settled into the room, "and certain triggers still cause him to shut down. But he recovers faster each time." Phoenix explored the hotel room with methodical thoroughness, examining each corner and doorway before settling near the terrace doors where he could observe both the room's entrance and the outside world. His behavior reminded Evie of her military training. Secure the perimeter, establish sight lines, identify exits. The parallel had never struck her quite so clearly before. The conference opened the following morning with registration and orientation sessions. Phoenix wore his therapy vest with dignified bearing, drawing appreciative glances and occasional recognition from attendees who had read his story. Evie had worried about his reaction to the crowds, the unfamiliar handlers, the constant stimulation of a large convention. But Phoenix moved through the spaces with remarkable composure, staying close to Evie's side but engaging calmly when approached with proper respect for his boundaries. "He understands his purpose here," remarked an elderly therapy dog trainer from Oregon, watching Phoenix respond to a tentative greeting from a shy teenage volunteer. "Not all dogs grasp the concept of public service, but he clearly knows he's working." Their first presentation was scheduled for the afternoon, a panel discussion on trauma-responsive therapy animals, featuring Phoenix as a demonstration subject. As Evie prepared her notes in their hotel room during lunch break, she realized her anxiety far exceeded Phoenix's. He lay calmly at her feet, occasionally glancing up as if to reassure her of his readiness. "You're the professional here, not me," she told him with a nervous laugh. Phoenix's tail thumped once against the carpet, that deliberate, singular response that had become his signature affirmation. The presentation room was filled beyond capacity, attendees standing against the walls and sitting cross-legged in aisles to witness the German Shepherd whose story had spread throughout the animal therapy community. Evie felt a moment of panic as they entered, questioning her decision to subject Phoenix to such scrutiny. But the dog moved confidently beside her, his focus neither distracted by the crowd nor overwhelmed by their attention. Dr. Margaret Chen, the panel moderator and a leading researcher in animal-assisted therapy, introduced Phoenix with respectful acknowledgement of his journey. What we witness today is not merely a success story of rehabilitation, but a testament to the remarkable capacity of animals to transcend trauma when provided with appropriate support and connection. For the next 90 minutes, Phoenix demonstrated the techniques and approaches Evie had developed during their work with veterans. His ability to recognize anxiety responses before they escalated. His careful positioning to create safety without imposing contact. His remarkable calm when confronted with triggers that would overwhelm most therapy animals. Throughout the demonstration, he maintained an awareness of Evie's location that spoke to their profound bond without displaying unhealthy dependence. The key distinction, Evie explained during the subsequent discussion, is that Phoenix doesn't merely tolerate potentially triggering situations. He's developed the capacity to assess and respond appropriately, distinguishing between actual and perceived threats. This makes him uniquely effective with trauma survivors who are working to develop the same discernment. Questions from the audience revealed the impact of Phoenix's story and presence. Therapists seeking guidance for their own work with rescued animals, shelter workers looking for hope in seemingly hopeless cases, veterans program coordinators interested in replicating their model. Phoenix remained steady throughout, occasionally making eye contact with audience members who seemed particularly affected by the discussion. As the session concluded with enthusiastic applause, an elderly man approached with careful, measured movements that suggested military bearing despite civilian clothes. He stopped at a respectful distance from Phoenix, his weathered face etched with emotion. "Vietnam," he said by way of introduction. 48 years since I came home, and I still look for the exits in every room I enter." His gaze shifted from Evie to Phoenix, watching him do the same thing, checking the perimeter, maintaining awareness, but staying calm despite it. "It's the first time I've felt understood in decades." Phoenix studied the man with that penetrating amber gaze, then did something unexpected. He stepped forward and gently pressed his head against the veteran's hand, not seeking attention or affection, but offering connection. The man's eyes filled with tears as he carefully stroked Phoenix's scarred head. "You two are healing more than just each other," he said, before moving away, voice rough with emotion. The moment crystallized something Evie had sensed but not fully articulated during their months of therapy work. Phoenix's value wasn't simply in his remarkable recovery or his therapeutic techniques. It was in his living embodiment of possibility, that trauma need not define a life, that vigilance could coexist with peace, that scars could signify survival rather than merely damage. Their scheduled commitments expanded as the conference continued. Word spread about the German Shepherd and his handler, drawing requests for additional demonstrations, impromptu consultations, and countless personal interactions with attendees moved by their story. Phoenix handled the increased demands with surprising stamina, though Evie carefully monitored him for signs of stress or overwhelm. "He's thriving on the engagement," observed Dr. Chen after watching Phoenix work with a group of therapy program directors. "Some animals tolerate this work, but he seems to find genuine purpose in it." On their third evening, following a particularly demanding day of presentations, Phoenix showed his first signs of fatigue, subtle changes in his posture and responsiveness that most observers would miss, but that Evie had learned to recognize. They returned to their hotel room earlier than planned, Phoenix settling onto his bed with an exhausted sigh that spoke volumes. "You've earned your rest," Evie told him, removing his therapy vest and massaging his shoulders where tension had accumulated. "Tomorrow we'll take a break from the conference. Do something just for us." Phoenix's eyes closed under her ministrations, his breathing deepening into sleep more quickly than usual. Watching him rest, Evie reflected on their journey from that rain-soaked dumpster to this moment of professional acknowledgement. The contrasts were stark, yet connected by an unbroken thread of resilience, his and hers, intertwined. Morning brought unexpected news from Blackwood, a development in the Callaway case that required his immediate return to Kentucky. "Nothing that affects your security," he assured Evie over breakfast in the hotel restaurant, Phoenix resting beneath their table. "But significant enough to warrant my presence." "Is it finally over?" Evie asked, realizing how much she still carried the weight of the case despite its official resolution. Blackwood's expression softened with understanding. "Getting closer every day. Judge Callaway's cooperation has accelerated matters considerably." He hesitated before adding, "He's asked to speak with you." The request landed like a stone in still water, ripples of tension spreading through Evie's body. "Why?" "He claims to have information about Phoenix's original theft, the circumstances that brought him into Harker's operation initially." Blackwood studied her reaction carefully. "You're under no obligation to agree. The case proceeds regardless." Phoenix shifted beneath the table, perhaps sensing Evie's discomfort. His warm weight pressed reassuringly against her legs, grounding her in the present reality rather than the shadows of their shared past. "Not now," she decided firmly. "Maybe not ever. Phoenix has moved beyond that history. Maybe I should too." Blackwood nodded, respecting her decision without pushing. "You both have built something remarkable here," he observed, gesturing toward the conference center where Phoenix's demonstration had drawn such response. "Something that matters beyond the case." After Blackwood's departure, Evie honored her promise of a conference break. They spent the day exploring the National Mall, Phoenix attracting attention in his therapy vest, but maintaining his characteristic calm among the tourist crowds. At the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, he seemed to understand the solemnity of the space, walking slowly beside Evie as visitors approached to thank him for his service, mistaking him for a military working dog, but recognizing something in his bearing that commanded respect. "He wasn't military," Evie would gently correct them, "but he works with veterans now." The explanations often led to conversations about Phoenix's journey, his work with PTSD survivors, the parallels between combat trauma and abuse. By afternoon, Evie realized they had conducted an impromptu education session that rivaled their formal conference presentations in impact. Phoenix had connected with dozens of veterans, family members, and active duty personnel, each interaction reinforcing the bridge he represented between suffering and healing. Their final day at the conference brought an unexpected honor. The National Association for Animal-Assisted Therapy announced the creation of the Phoenix Fund, a scholarship program to support the training of rescued dogs for therapeutic work with trauma survivors. Phoenix was invited to the stage for the announcement, his composed presence beside Evie drawing a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. "From the darkest circumstances can come the most profound healing," Dr. Chen stated during the presentation. Phoenix embodies this truth not merely as a symbol, but as a living practitioner of recovery through service. As they prepared for the journey home the following morning, Evie reflected on the significance of their Washington experience. What had begun as a professional demonstration had evolved into something more profound, a public affirmation of Phoenix's journey and the model of recovery he represented. No longer defined as a victim or evidence, he had emerged as a healer in his own right, his history informing but not limiting his purpose. The drive back to Asheville took them through Virginia's rolling countryside, Phoenix alternating between watchful observation and contented rest. They stopped at a scenic overlook in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the familiar landscape signaling their approach to their adopted home. Standing beside Phoenix as he surveyed the vista, Evie felt a sense of completion that transcended the conference's success. "We did good, boy," she told him, one hand resting on his scarred head. Phoenix leaned against her leg in response, his solid presence an anchor in a world that had once seemed defined by uncertainty. Their return to Asheville brought immediate evidence of the conference's impact. Messages waited from therapy programs across the country seeking consultation on Phoenix's rehabilitation model. Journalists requested interviews about their work with veterans. A prominent publishing house had expressed interest in a book about their journey from rescue to healing practice. Yet amid these professional opportunities, the most significant development awaited in a letter delivered during their absence. Grace Sullivan had decided to sell her Cedar Grove home and relocate to Asheville, her recovery from the stroke progressing well enough for independent living. "This town has too many ghosts now," she wrote in her distinctive scrawl. "And that mountain air you're always bragging about sounds good for these old lungs. Found a little place not far from yours. Hope that dog of yours remembers his manners around an old lady." The news brought unexpected joy. Grace's forthright presence had been one of the few aspects of Cedar Grove that Evie truly missed. Phoenix, upon hearing Grace's name read from the letter, had perked his ears in apparent recognition, tail wagging with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "You remember your first champion?" Evie told him, recalling how Grace had defended Phoenix against neighborhood suspicions during those early days of his recovery. The weeks following their return established a new rhythm, expanded by the opportunities flowing from the conference, but anchored in the foundation they had built together. Phoenix's therapy sessions with veterans continued with deepened effectiveness, his demonstrated success in Washington adding credibility to their approach. Evie began developing a training program for other handlers working with traumatized animals, drawing on their experiences to create a structured methodology. Grace arrived in early July, her new home a small cottage within walking distance of Evie's property. Phoenix's reaction to her arrival confirmed the special bond they had formed in Cedar Grove. He greeted her with gentle enthusiasm, remaining close during her first visit as if assessing her recovery from the stroke. "Still got that watchful eye," Grace observed, patting Phoenix's head with affection. "Good to know some things don't change." Summer unfolded with steady purpose, their lives expanding beyond the shadows of Harker's operation and the Calloway case. Phoenix's nightmares grew increasingly rare, though certain triggers, particularly violent thunderstorms, could still provoke anxiety responses. His recovery continued as an ongoing journey rather than a destination, each setback followed by renewed progress that inspired the veterans they worked with. "If he can come back from what was done to him," a former Marine told Evie after a particularly breakthrough session, "maybe there's hope for the rest of us too." In August, Blackwood visited with final news about the case. Judge William Calloway's cooperation had led to indictments against 3 additional judicial officers and exposed a network of corruption extending beyond Kentucky into neighboring states. The judge himself had begun serving his 10-year sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. "He still asks about you," Blackwood mentioned carefully, watching Phoenix and Evie relax on the porch after a long day of therapy sessions. About Phoenix, too. Evie considered the information with less emotion than she might have expected months earlier. "What does he want to know?" "If you're both well." "If Phoenix has recovered fully." Blackwood hesitated. "He claims to regret his role in what happened. Says he never knew the extent of the dog's mistreatment." Phoenix had risen at Blackwood's tone, moving to position himself beside Evie in that protective stance he still adopted when sensing her discomfort. The gesture reminded her how far they had come, and how some connections to their past remained unresolved. "Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear what he has to say," Evie acknowledged. "But not yet. We're still writing a different story now." Blackwood nodded, understanding the boundaries she had established. "The official protection period has concluded," he noted. "But I'd like to stay in touch, if that's acceptable. Professional courtesy." The phrase made Evie smile, recognizing the friendship that had developed beyond their official connection. "I think Phoenix would miss your visits," she replied, watching the dog's relaxed posture beside her. "And so would I." As summer transitioned to fall, Phoenix's first anniversary with Evie approached, a milestone that seemed worthy of acknowledgement. The date itself remained approximate. She knew only that it had been a rainy morning in late September when she'd discovered him in the dumpster behind the Cedar Grove clinic. "How does one celebrate such an anniversary?" she asked Grace during one of their regular evening visits on the porch. "It feels important to mark it somehow." Grace considered the question with her characteristic directness. "Seems to me you're already celebrating it every day. Both of you. Living well instead of just surviving." She watched Phoenix patrolling the yard's perimeter, his movement purposeful rather than anxious. "But if you want something special, maybe take him back to where it began. Not to dwell on the past, but to measure the distance traveled." The suggestion resonated unexpectedly. Cedar Grove held complicated memories for both of them, but perhaps a brief return, now that the case was resolved and their new life established, would provide closure neither had fully achieved. After consulting with Dr. Walters about potential impacts on Phoenix's continued recovery, Evie planned a day trip to Cedar Grove for late September. They would visit the veterinary clinic where their journey began, perhaps drive past her old apartment, and most importantly, visit the small cemetery where Harold Sullivan was buried. A proper thank you from both of them for the information that had helped bring down Harker's operation. The morning of their journey dawned clear and cool, autumn colors beginning to tinge the Blue Ridge Mountains. Phoenix entered the car without hesitation, his trust in their partnership now transcending any anxiety about unknown destinations. The 3-hour drive passed peacefully, Phoenix alternating between watchful observation and contented rest beside Evie. Cedar Grove appeared largely unchanged at first glance. The same small-town storefronts, the familiar town square with its century-old oak trees. Yet subtle differences emerged as they drove slowly through the streets. New businesses had replaced some associated with Harker's network. The police station displayed a fresh coat of paint and a community outreach billboard. The veterinary clinic where Evie had worked now bore Dr. Wilson's name above the door. Evie parked behind the clinic in the same spot where she had discovered Phoenix a year earlier. For a moment they both sat silently in the car, perhaps each remembering that rainy morning from their different perspectives. "We've come a long way," she said softly, reaching to stroke Phoenix's head. His eyes met hers with that penetrating intelligence, no fear evident despite the location's potential triggers. When she opened the car door, he followed with calm confidence, pausing only briefly to sniff the area near the dumpster before moving on, acknowledging the past without being trapped by it. Dr. Wilson greeted them warmly, having followed Phoenix's story through professional journals and the recent conference coverage. The clinic itself had been renovated, removing physical reminders of Dr. Anderson's tenure. Phoenix explored the space with mild interest but no signs of distress, accepting gentle attention from staff members who marveled at his transformation from the broken creature described in case files. "What you've accomplished together is remarkable," Dr. Wilson told Evie as they prepared to leave. "It's changed how we approach severe abuse cases here. Given us hope for animals we might have previously considered beyond rehabilitation." Their next stop was the cemetery, a peaceful space on the town's outskirts where generations of Cedar Grove residents rested beneath ancient maple trees. Harold Sullivan's grave was well maintained, fresh flowers suggesting Grace's arrangements before her relocation to Asheville. Phoenix sat quietly beside Evie as she placed a small stone on the headstone, a Jewish tradition she'd learned from a veteran in their therapy program, signifying remembrance that outlasted flowers. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing the truth when others looked away." As they turned to leave the cemetery, Evie noticed a solitary figure standing near the entrance. A woman in her early 30s, watching them with undisguised interest. Something in her posture triggered recognition, though Evie couldn't immediately place her. "Evelyn Calloway?" the woman called, approaching with careful steps. "I thought that might be you, and this must be Phoenix." Phoenix tensed slightly beside Evie but remained composed, assessing rather than retreating. "I'm Rebecca Anderson," the woman introduced herself. "Robert's daughter. I've been hoping to meet you both someday." The connection registered immediately. Dr. Anderson had mentioned a daughter living in Nashville during their early conversations at the clinic. Phoenix's reaction suggested no negative association with her scent or presence. "My father writes to me about Phoenix from prison," Rebecca explained, maintaining a respectful distance. "Says helping him was the one truly good thing he did during those years with Harker." The statement hung in the autumn air, complicated by history yet genuine in its delivery. Evie found herself uncertain how to respond, the weight of Dr. Anderson's dual role in Phoenix's life still unresolved in her own heart. "Phoenix has thrived," she finally said, choosing simple truth. "Despite everything?" Rebecca nodded, emotion evident in her expression. "My father was not a good man for many years. What he did, the choices he made, I can't defend them." She looked directly at Phoenix, who returned her gaze with characteristic intensity. "But seeing you both here, knowing what you've accomplished together, it matters. Not for his redemption, but for what it says about healing despite people like him." The insight struck Evie as remarkably perceptive. Phoenix's journey had never been about forgiving those who had harmed him, but about reclaiming his life despite their actions. The distinction felt important, even liberating. They spoke briefly about Phoenix's therapy work, the conference recognition, the programs developing from their model. Rebecca listened with genuine interest, occasionally glancing at Phoenix with something like reverence. "Would it be all right if I told my father I met you both?" she asked as they prepared to leave. "That Phoenix is doing extraordinary work now?" Evie considered the request, watching Phoenix for any sign of distress at the conversation. Finding none, she nodded. "You can tell him. Phoenix's story belongs to Phoenix now, not to those who tried to break him." Their final stop in Cedar Grove was unplanned. Evie's old apartment complex, where they had weathered those first difficult weeks of Phoenix's rehabilitation. The building looked smaller somehow, less significant than in her memory. Phoenix showed no particular reaction to the location, treating it as simply another place rather than a site of emotional significance. As they prepared for the journey home, Evie realized Cedar Grove had been transformed for them both, from a place of danger and trauma to simply a town where part of their story had unfolded. The power it once held over their lives had diminished, replaced by the stronger reality they had built together in Asheville. The drive home felt lighter somehow, as if some invisible weight had been shed during their brief return. Phoenix slept peacefully beside her for much of the journey, his occasional glances conveying contentment rather than vigilance. When the familiar outline of the Blue Ridge Mountains appeared on the horizon, Evie felt the rightness of their chosen home with renewed clarity. Grace was waiting on their porch when they arrived, having used her spare key to leave a small celebration, a proper dog cake for Phoenix and a home-cooked meal for Evie. "Figured you might need some comfort after stirring up old ghosts," the elderly woman explained, watching Phoenix investigate his cake with dignified interest before taking a careful bite. "Actually, it was good to go back," Evie admitted, accepting the plate Grace offered. "To see it all from this side of the journey. To remember where we started without being pulled back there." As twilight settled over the mountains, the three of them sat contentedly on the porch. An unlikely family formed through extraordinary circumstances. Phoenix moved occasionally between them, accepting gentle attention from both women, before resuming his preferred position near Evie's chair. "You know what Harold would say about all this?" Grace remarked, gesturing toward Phoenix and the peaceful property they now called home. "He'd say sometimes the good Lord works through the darkest circumstances to bring souls together who need each other." The sentiment, though not aligned with Evie's own spiritual framework, captured something essential about their journey. From the cruelty of Harker's operation, the corruption of Judge Calloway's influence, the moral compromises of Dr. Anderson, through all this darkness had emerged a connection that had healed them both in ways neither could have achieved alone. Phoenix rested his head on Evie's knee, amber eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. His scars remained visible, physical reminders of suffering that would never completely fade. But they had been transformed from marks of victimhood to badges of extraordinary resilience. In them, Evie saw not just Phoenix's story, but echoes of every survivor who had found healing through their work together. "1 year," she said softly, stroking his scarred head. "The first of many." Phoenix's tail thumped once against the porch boards, that deliberate, singular response that had first captured her heart in the rain-soaked dumpster, a gesture that still said more clearly than words ever could, "Yes, I am here. We continue." And in that simple affirmation lay all the hope and healing their remarkable journey had made possible, not just for themselves, but for countless others who would find in their story the courage to rise from their own darkest circumstances, transformed but unbroken. Dear friends, Phoenix's journey from a broken, abandoned dog to becoming a healing presence in veterans' lives reminds us it's never too late for a new chapter. Like Phoenix, many of us carry scars, divorce, loss of loved ones, health challenges. Yet these marks tell stories of survival, not defeat. Remember Evie's words. The scars are part of his story, not interruptions to it. At our age, we've weathered storms that once seemed impossible to survive, yet here we stand. Phoenix found purpose in helping others heal from trauma similar to his own. What greater gift could there be than transforming our pain into purpose? When Phoenix checked his surroundings before relaxing, he wasn't dwelling on past dangers. He was creating safety to move forward. Isn't that wisdom we've all earned through decades of living? As Grace Sullivan wisely noted, sometimes the good Lord works through the darkest circumstances to bring souls together who need each other. Have you experienced a Phoenix moment, where past pain became your greatest strength? Or is there someone who, like Evie did for Phoenix, saw value in you when you couldn't see it yourself? Please share your stories below. Your experience might be the very hope someone else needs today.